Good luck.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday when I interview one of the most significant political figures of our era, Boris Johnson. Nothing will be off limits as we discuss his autobiography, Unleashed, and everything in it.
I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit. And I'm very, very happy to be on Camilla Tominey's show, Boris Johnson on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. and again at 6 p.m.
Good Afternoon Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday the 4th of October. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Decarbonisation or deindustrialisation? Sir Keir Starmer insists he will not sacrifice British industry to eco-zealots. This as he pledges a whopping £22 billion for green technologies. Is carbon capture enough to keep British industry alive?
And could the Falklands be next? Renewed fears today over the future of the Falklands and Gibraltar after the government's decision to surrender control of the Chagos Islands. This as Boris Johnson slams the move as crazy.
Raging Ayatollah. Iran's warmongering supreme leader calls on Muslim nations to prepare against their common enemy, labelling the recent ballistic missile onslaught on Israel the minimum punishment for what he calls its bloodthirsty, vampiric regime.
Three pretty meaty stories there to go at. I'm interested to know, I wasn't here yesterday, and of course you were covering this news about the Chagos Islands. Huge amount of anger at this decision that appeared to come out of nowhere.
Yeah. The strange thing is, this was a process that was started in 2022 under the last government, but when David Cameron became Foreign Secretary, he spoke to people in the Ministry of Defence. He put a stop to the deal. He put a stop to all of those negotiations. It was not the policy of the last government by the time they went into the election to give up this territory. And then we get a new government coming in, we get a new Foreign Secretary, and suddenly this territory is ceded for nothing in return. Literally nothing.
I don't get it. They've been in power for, what, 3 months now? About 3 months, thereabouts. And this is seemingly quite close to the top of the agenda, the top of the priority list. And what does this mean for the future? We've obviously got calls from Argentina now to hand back the Falklands, in their words, renewed vows to get it back. What else are the government going to give back?
And this is the thing. Well, exactly, that's the distinction. Because it's not giving back. I mean, the Falklands were not inhabited by the Argentinian Spanish before the British. There wasn't a native population on the Falklands, is what I'm trying to say. Just as there wasn't a native population on the Chagos Islands. The first people to get there were the French, then we defeated Napoleon and we got them fair and square in war. I mean, why is it that now suddenly islands that are thousands of miles away are getting a greater claim over these islands than we do when we won them completely fairly, completely legally, as a result of the Congress of Vienna in 1814. I mean...
Is it not the government's job to act in our best interests as British? I mean, you know, are we allowed to act in our national interest anymore?
I don't think we are. I mean, one of the most
are.
extraordinary things is this was announced when Parliament was not sitting because of the timing of the Mauritian elections. We are prioritising elections in Mauritius over our own parliament, and more than that, I mean, this is giving a free hand to the government of Mauritius. Why are we... if anything, that sounds like election interference to me.
Well, is this a sign of our decline? GBNews.com/your say. Please do get in touch, but let's get the headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just gone 12 o'clock. The top story from the newsroom this hour. Sir Keir Starmer has announced a £22 billion funding package for so-called carbon capture clusters and storage projects. Speaking to workers in Liverpool earlier, he called the investment a moment of partnership, promising 4,000 new jobs. But following his speech, our political correspondent Catherine Forster challenged the Prime Minister over the cost of the transition to that so-called green and clean energy.
With renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And, of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs.
The Prime Minister there speaking earlier to our political correspondent. Well, turning to the Middle East, the UK is sending another £10 million in life-saving aid to Lebanon and is urging Britons to leave immediately as the conflict there continues to escalate. It follows a night of massive blasts in Beirut, and this was the moment giant explosions were seen near the city's airport. Well, in the past 24 hours, at least 45 people have died across Lebanon as Israel launched its most intense airstrikes on the capital so far. Israeli forces are also escalating ground operations in the south of the Strip, targeting Hezbollah militants. You can see their live pictures of the skyline with clouds hanging and smoke hanging in the air over Beirut. Meanwhile, tensions are rising with Iran following missile attacks on Israel. And in Gaza, airstrikes have pushed the death toll to now almost 42,000 since the conflict began. Here, meanwhile, another flight carrying Britons fleeing that spiralling conflict in Lebanon has landed in Birmingham. It's the second UK chartered plane to arrive so far. More than 150 UK nationals have already left Beirut, and troops are on standby in Cyprus for a potential military-led emergency evacuation if the city's airport closes. It comes as G7 leaders are urging restraint and condemning Iran for destabilising the region. The government is being warned its deal to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius could put more overseas territories at risk. It comes as Argentina is now pledging to gain full sovereignty over the Falkland Islands. However, Britain insists its commitment to the Falklands is unwavering. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us he thinks the Chagos deal is crazy.
Islands being given back to Mauritius. Your reaction?
Crazy. I mean, I urge viewers of GB News to get out your maps, get out your atlases, check out the Chagos Islands, see where they are, and see where Mauritius is. A long way away.
Yes.
What is this claim? It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Why are we doing this? Sheer political correctness.
A quick bit of breaking news for you this lunchtime from the Metropolitan Police. Two former officers have been handed their jobs back and they'll receive back pay after winning an appeal in a high-profile stop-and-search case of two black athletes more than 4 years ago. Bianca Williams and her partner Ricardo dos Santos were stopped by Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks in 2020. Those two officers were then dismissed for allegedly lying about smelling cannabis when they confronted the two athletes. However, a tribunal has ruled that the decision to fire them was irrational and clearing both officers of any wrongdoing. And it's been confirmed British tech tycoon Mike Lynch drowned when his superyacht sank off the coast of Sicily in August. An inquest opened this morning confirmed the 59-year-old's cause of death, but post-mortems for his daughter Hannah and others remain inconclusive. They were among 7 killed when the vessel was caught in a storm, including Morgan Stanley chairman Jonathan Bloomer and his wife Judy. The investigation will continue with the next hearing scheduled for April 2025. The Health Secretary is calling on GPs to help make the NHS fit for the future, urging for an end to their collective protest action, something he says is only punishing patients. It comes as new figures from August have revealed 1 in 20 GP appointments were either online or via video, sparking debate over whether it increases access or compromises patient care. Well, speaking in Liverpool this morning, Wes Streeting told the Royal College of GPs conference that collaboration is vital to rebuild the health service.
The 3 shifts that underpin this government's reform agenda, from hospital to community, analogue to digital, sickness to prevention, those shifts are not new ideas and they are not radical, but delivering them really would be. I can't do it on my own. I need every part of the NHS to pull together as one team with one purpose, to be the generation that took the NHS from the worst crisis in its history, got it back on its feet and made it fit for the future.
And finally, the world's first ovarian cancer vaccine being developed here in the UK could wipe out the disease, according to Oxford scientists. Ovarian Vax trains the immune system to detect and then attack the earliest signs of the disease. Cancer Research UK is backing the project and calls it an exciting step forward in cancer prevention. Although full approval is still years away, clinical trials could begin as soon as 4 to 5 years' time. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you for another roundup at 12:30.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 10 minutes past 12. And the Labour government's £22 billion investment in carbon capture and storage technology is the politics of national renewal, according to Sir Keir Starmer today.
Speaking at a glass-making factory in Cheshire, the Prime Minister stated the move is reigniting our industrial heartlands by investing in the energy of the future, and that the necessary mission of decarbonisation does not mean deindustrialisation.
It's a bold claim. It's a bold claim. Joining us now is the co-founder of the Climate Majority Project, Rupert Reid. Rupert, Sir Keir Starmer insisting today that essentially we won't lose any great British industry as a result of our net zero drive. How can you promise that?
Well, I think the key thing here is the choices that are being made by this policy decision. So Starmer is saying they're going to invest 22 billion in carbon capture technology. But 22 billion, when I last looked, that's a lot of money. Imagine what you could do with that if you were to put it instead into something else like insulating all our homes. I think what a lot of viewers of your programme will be thinking is, why are we heating the sky? Why are we wasting energy right left of the centre? There are ways of decarbonising which are good for jobs and good for reducing waste and don't require such vast speculative investments as this one.
Well, of course, he's talking about industry. Now, we do need energy to produce glass, to produce steel, to really have any sort of heavy industry in this country at all. Insulating homes is a very good thing and a noble cause, but that's not an industrial strategy. I mean, does it matter to you, Rupert, that the industrial price of energy in this country is now the highest in the G20? It's more than twice as expensive as it is in the US, and this is eroding our industrial base.
Well, in terms of the industrial price of energy, maybe we should look at having more renewable energy, which is becoming the cheapest energy that is available, and less nuclear energy, which is becoming the most expensive. And in terms of the point
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you on that point, Rupert, because we do know that, yes, wind and solar energy are very cheap to produce when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. But we also know, because of their intermittency, you need backup. You need very expensive batteries, climate-damaging gas-fired power stations, baseload nuclear. You need to double up your energy supply for every renewable intermittent source of energy you have. Is it not a falsehood to suggest that this is cheap energy when that doesn't include all of the costs for the extra grid balancing paraphernalia that has to go along with it?
When you have a mixed basket of renewables, you actually don't need nearly such a backup. And battery technology and other storage technologies are becoming cheaper all the time. And also, by the way, it's now becoming possible to use renewable energy directly for some of these heavy industrial usages. I'm working with people, for example, who are looking to decarbonize the production of steel and make steel production possible with renewable energy. Now, if I can just finish this point, if we had a lot more energy to play with and a lot less energy being wasted, we'd need a lot less energy from any dodgy sources in the first place. And that's the reason why I mentioned the importance of insulation. I would say for £22 billion, putting that into insulation, we could insulate. Do you know that a third of the homes in this country have no insulation in their roof? I think most of your viewers would just think that's crazy. Isn't that a better use of money than this completely speculative 22 billion? Carbon capture technology, we don't even know that it's going to work at scale.
I mean, I think a lot of people are looking at these types of announcements and they're thinking, hang on a minute, we have decarbonised quicker than the vast, vast majority of countries, if not all of them. And at the same time, our energy bills are now the highest, one of the highest in the entire world. So our decarbonisation efforts don't seem to be reaping rewards. And then we hear Keir Starmer talking about how he's not going to sacrifice great British industry. Well, what about North Sea oil and gas? What about all those thousands of jobs, very good, well-paid jobs that are just going to go?
Well, it's good that you mentioned North Sea oil and gas. If you had a spokesperson on here from a fossil fuel company, I can tell you what they'd say about this 22 billion announcement. They'd say, this is a great idea. This is really good. This is just what we want. And if we're doing just what the fossil fuel companies want at this moment in history, then I think we're not doing the right thing. I think everybody knows that. They're not out for our public benefit. They're not out for a future. They're out for a quick buck. I think that it's a serious mistake for the government to have put this money into something which the fossil fuel companies are going to love, when they could have put it into stuff like insulation, like renewables, like putting these kinds of sources of energy for the future into industry, which would have actually been for the public benefit and for future benefit.
Of course, what Ed Miliband is saying today is that he is doing that it's an all-in strategy, that we can't just put all of our eggs in the wind basket or the solar basket or the insulation basket or the carbon and
But if you put all those baskets together,
it has to be an all-in
That's
policy.
when you
disagree with that?
Together, that's when you actually have a strategy that makes sense. And I think it's incredible that they're putting 22 billion into this when they've been saying we can't afford to find the 28 billion for the changes that we wanted to bring to industry to make them more decarbonized. You know, there was such a fuss made about, oh yeah, we're actually not going to spend that 28 billion. But now they found this 22 billion.
Yeah, but Rupert, the 28 billion was an annual figure.
We really need.
The 28 billion was an annual figure, and this 22 billion is a figure over the course of the next 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, I understand that, but that would be pretty much 1 year of that entire amount of money. I mean, like I say, 22 billion is a lot of money. Imagine what you could do with it. That's what I keep coming back to. I think the majority of people would think there are far, far better ways of spending this money than doing exactly what the fossil fuel companies want.
I mean, is insulation of homes the top priority? I mean, that's reducing our energy consumption, which is fantastic. Yeah. But we have an increasing population.
Right?
We're going to be building more homes, so people are going to use more energy. Surely the money, if the money is going to go somewhere, should be in the production of energy.
But Emily, look, we're heating the sky, right? Who wants to do that? It's a no-brainer. Insulation is an absolute no-brainer. It should be the first thing that any government does. So that's why I say, why are we not doing that? Why are we spending 22 billion on a punt, which we've no idea, frankly, whether it's even going to work or not?
Of course, I'm looking at a list of G20 countries here. The UK has dropped its energy production by more than any other country, 35% in the last 10 years. The only other country to have had a similar drop in energy production, although only minus 22% rather than 35% like us, is South Africa. South Africa has blackouts. I mean, can we really go on with this pretense that we can keep reducing the amount of energy we produce and have the same quality of life?
But Tom, it's not a pretense. If we stop heating the sky, we'll be able to reduce the amount of energy we produce and use and maintain the same quality of life, in fact, a better quality of life. Right? So I would say we should be proud of the fact that we're able to reduce our energy consumption, but we should be reducing our energy consumption much more. Reduction of waste is just a no-brainer.
I mean, Rupert, you'd make a fantastic point if everyone else was on board, wouldn't you? But at the moment, it seems as though we're just exporting our carbon emissions elsewhere. Other countries are doubling up with all of their coal and fossil fuel use. Meanwhile, our electricity bills, our energy bills are going sky high. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed, Rupert Read. Really fantastic to have you on, co-founder of the Climate Majority Project.
As someone who lives now in a leaky Victorian home, I do get his point.
Yeah, insulation important.
Insulation is very important, but that's entirely aside from the issue of industrial energy prices. I mean, household consumption is very important, and we all want lower bills, but actually household energy bills have gone up by less than industry energy bills have done. Industrial energy is what the government wants to talk about today, and I don't think Rupert Read had an answer there.
Also, I'm not really sure this is going to make up for all of the job losses related to the North Sea at all. With GB Energy, it's going to be a few office jobs up in Aberdeen, right? A few office jobs, not real, you know, not proper good jobs, not the ones that the trade unions want to protect.
No, I mean, there are some jobs that sort of, you know, direct people, move money around, and others that produce things. This isn't going to be a producing set of jobs. Well, I mean, we've been told now that GB Energy won't produce any energy.
I just think it's a bit tone-deaf to say I will not sacrifice British industry to eco-zealots when that's exactly what we've been doing for, well, several years. That's it. We're going to take a quick break because we've got lots more coming up. The sun appears to be setting on the British Empire, doesn't it, as the Chagos Islands are given to Mauritius. Could the Falklands be next?
Well, that is our point of discussion in 3 short minutes' time.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My kingdom for a voice. Scientists have... I can't believe this story. Scientists have incredibly recreated the voice of Richard III using both his skull shape and a knowledge of medieval speech patterns. Me neither. The result is that the king, who was famously killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, would have spoken in English close to that of a man from modern-day Yorkshire or Somerset. Let's take a listen.
The sun shines with no less light and splendour, nor does it suffer any diminution of its strength.
Let's discuss this further with Yvonne Morley-Chisholm, the voice coach behind the project, who spent 10 years researching how the monarch would have sounded. Yvonne, you can probably see from my face, I have no idea how this works. Can you enlighten me as to what all this is about?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Dawn. So I had a mad idea 10 years ago. I normally work with actors where we have a recording of a historical person, and we do something called vocal profiling to train the actor who's going to be performing on stage or screen to move their tongue tip, their jaw, their lips, everything, and get behind the personality of who they're playing. We obviously have quite a lot of that missing from Richard. We don't have a recording of him, but I wondered how far we could go. And a key player in this has been and is Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who over a decade ago created his face, first of all, from his skull. Now, on the day we, as Shakespeare would say, shuffle off our mortal coil, every little dent and dimple in the bones says how fit and strong the muscles were. So I thought, OK, we know what his face could do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We
Proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday when I interview one of the most significant political figures of our era, Boris Johnson. Nothing will be off limits as we discuss his autobiography, Unleashed, and everything in it.
I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit. And I'm very, very happy to be on Camilla Tominey's show, Boris Johnson on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. and again at 6 p.m.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 23 minutes past 12, and we're to return now to that breaking story we covered yesterday. There's been a huge amount of reaction to it over the past 24 hours, that the sun is setting on the British Empire. Yes, the Chagos Islands are set to be handed back to Mauritius.
But the question today is, will other territories follow suit?
Sorry, I said back. They were never controlled by a sovereign Mauritius. No, not handed back, handed over to Mauritius. Of course, they had been British, and before that they were French.
And the Chagos Islanders, who are living here in the UK, they don't seem too impressed by this all.
They hate Mauritius. Yeah. Mauritius was horrible to them.
Yeah, they're furious, actually. But yes, Argentina now have promised to reclaim the Falklands Islands. Apparently they have concrete action to do so. That's according to their foreign minister. So where is this all going? Where is this all going?
Well, we're delighted to be joined now by the Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum, Dr. Philip Kisley. Philip, there is a concern now about a domino effect on British territory that is overseas, British overseas territories. Is that something we should be concerned about?
Oh, yes, I think very much so. First of all, it's great to speak to you, Tom and Emily, again. I think let's just look at what's happening. This move, the Chagos move, has been framed in decolonisation language, but also military strategy. And what have we actually done? We've handed over a strategic position to China via Mauritius, you know. So as far as those two agendas are concerned, this is a complete catastrophe. But who would have thought there would be a domino effect? Answer: absolutely everybody, apart from, it seems, the British government. So this was always going to happen. The language that the Argentinians are using is extremely alarming, and this is just the first day. Falkland Islanders are waking up this morning and wondering, you know, what on earth their future is going to be. I mean, but we've got this Achilles heel, and it's our history. And let's be clear about this. Britain has been a great force for good in the world. Yes, we've not been perfect, but we have been a great force for good in the world. If anybody mentions colonialism, we just seem to kind of fall like a house of cards. But the language that Argentina are using, they're saying essentially that this was gifted to them by Spain, the colonial power Spain, in the 1800s. And so, of course, it's perfectly legitimate that they should own the Falkland Islands. So it's totally hypocritical. It's very, very frightening. And it's just indicative of the geopolitical posturing that's happening. And we just, with this government, we don't seem up to be able to deal with posturing.
It seems as though our governments, perhaps successive governments as well as this one, are sort of ashamed to act in the British national interest, that the wants of other people, for various reasons, and seem to trump our own. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I think that's precisely right, Emily, and I think that it just goes back to what I just said. It's about this Achilles heel about our own identity and our own history. We seem to not only loathe ourselves, we seem to be out to self-harm. This is playing out on the national stage, but you only have to look domestically to see exactly the same thing happening in all our institutions, in our education. And it comes back to this idea of we're educating people to hate themselves. So you can't expect all of that stuff to happen at home and then expect us to look after our own interests. And this is the really, really frightening. Expect us to look after our own interests abroad.
But Philip, why is this all in the language of colonialism when the Chagos Islands were uninhabited before being discovered by Europeans? The French then took control of them, and then Napoleon was defeated and we took control of them. That's the history of the Chagos Islands. There wasn't a native population there before Europeans came along. The Europeans were the first there. Similarly with the Falkland Islands. I mean, it's the same story. The Argentine claim, as you mentioned, relies on Spanish colonialism. It relies on a papal bull from 1493, when the Pope said this half of the world belongs to Spain and that half of the world belongs to Portugal. I mean, it's a fantastical nonsense. And yet, what seems to be the most curious thing here, Philip, is that the language of anti-colonialism is being used to defend colonialist claims.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it sums up the whole woke mind virus. And there's something at the heart of it. And again, I've talked about the alarming language, but there's something really insidious about the whole thing. And this is that we don't understand, one, our own history, but we don't understand the history of the world. Okay, so if you're out to completely defeat yourself and you can only think in broad terms of gender, race, sexuality, and that's the only thing you can think of, you kind of go back to the most obvious broad brushstroke ideology positions, and they don't stand up, you know, because ideology really has nothing to do with the minutiae of everyday development of political and cultural history and social history. Okay, it's like painting the Mona Lisa with a crayon. Okay, it's so stupid. But we don't have, and it comes back to education, we don't have the ability to stand up to this kind of thing, because people just tend to assume that people in power are right. And let's bear in mind who we're talking about here. We're talking about David Lammy, for God's sake, and we're talking about Keir Starmer. So I think it's time that we really understood ourselves, understood our position in the world, and stood up for ourselves. But I can't see that happening at any time soon.
Well, there you go. Dr. Philip Kisley, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out of your afternoon to speak to us. You're from the New Culture Forum. Yes, I mean, using the language around decolonisation and imperialism to try and justify moves like this doesn't stack up, does it? It's more just about anti-British sentiment, isn't it? We're the worst people in the world, therefore any claim for something that we have control of must be legitimate.
I wouldn't be surprised if we think that sort of, you know, all these... I suppose we're dreadful Anglo-Saxons, aren't we? So we should probably hand back. We should probably hand back Northumbria, definitely Cornwall. I think. I mean, how far back do we want to go in terms of land that was previously invaded? Or maybe it works the other way around. Maybe we need compensation from Denmark for Danelaw, where they raided the entire east coast of England for a good 100 years or so.
Oh, it doesn't work that way, though, does it? We'll never get compensation.
No. I mean, we were brutally invaded by the Vikings, by the Normans, by the Romans. But I mean, we have no we can't say that we were. I mean, why is it so different?
Yes, and we're far too sensible to launch some kind of campaign for recuperation or reparations or whatever it is. Anyway, let us know what you make of it all. Yeah, it's pretty predictable, isn't it, that Argentina would decide to get in on the action. Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Some breaking news, actually, in the last hour. Now, 2 former Met police officers have been handed back their jobs after winning an appeal. This surrounds the stop and search of British athlete Bianca Williams. This is very interesting indeed. We'll have more details after your headlines with Sam.
Very good afternoon to you. 12:32 exactly. The top story from the newsroom this lunchtime. Sir Keir Starmer has announced what he calls a game-changing £22 billion funding package for projects that capture and store carbon emissions. Speaking to workers in Liverpool earlier, he said the investment in so-called carbon capture clusters will create thousands of jobs, bring in investment and help meet climate goals. But Green campaigners are warning the move could prolong oil and gas production, with the projects not set to begin storing carbon until 2028. Well, following that speech in Liverpool, our political correspondent Catherine Forster challenged the Prime Minister over the cost of the transition to that so-called clean and green energy.
With renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs.
The UK is sending another £10 million in life-saving aid to Lebanon and urging Britons to leave immediately as the conflict in the region continues. It follows a night of massive blasts in Beirut, the Lebanese capital, and this was the moment giant explosions were seen near the city's airport. Well, in the past 24 hours, at least 45 people have now died across Lebanon as Israel launched its most intense airstrikes so far on the capital. Israeli forces are also escalating ground operations in the south of Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah militants. You can see there on the screen live pictures of the skyline above Beirut with clouds of smoke hanging in the air. Meanwhile, tensions are also rising with Iran following missile attacks on Israel. In Gaza, airstrikes have now pushed the death toll to almost 42,000 since that conflict began. And staying, in fact, with that latest line from the Middle East, we're just hearing from the Reuters news agency that sirens are now sounding in southern Israel, bordering Gaza. That's the first time, they say, in nearly 2 months. And in a statement just released on social media, the IDF have said, quote, almost a year after the October the 7th attacks, Hamas, they say, is still threatening Israeli civilians with their terrorism. So we're just hearing that southern Israel is now experiencing some form of attack from Hamas, with sirens sounding in the region. In other news, Downing Street insists its deal to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius does not change the approach to other overseas territories. It comes as Argentina is now pledging to gain full sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. However, the government insists its commitment to the Falklands is unwavering. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us he thinks that Chagos deal is crazy.
Yeah. Chagos Islands being given back to Mauritius. Your reaction?
Crazy. I mean, I urge viewers of GB News to get out your maps, get out your atlases, check out the Chagos Islands, see where they are, and see where Mauritius is. A long way away.
Yes.
What is this claim? It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Why are we doing this? Sheer...
And finally, 2 former Met Police officers are getting their jobs back after winning an appeal in a high-profile stop-and-search case of 2 black athletes. Bianca Williams and her partner, Ricardo dos Santos, were stopped by Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks in 2020. The pair were then dismissed for allegedly lying about smelling cannabis when they confronted the 2 athletes. However, a tribunal has today ruled the decision to fire them was irrational and cleared both officers of wrongdoing. They'll now return to duty with the Metropolitan Force. Those are the latest headlines for now. A full roundup coming up at 1 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello
Hi, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, there's going to be plenty of fine and dry weather across the country and feeling warm where you do catch the sunshine. Away from the northwest, though, where we do have some wet and windy weather, and this is where low pressure is taking hold, moving into the northwest of the country, but still high pressure remaining dominant across much of England and Wales, bringing us that fine weather to end the working week. So plenty of sunny spells across England, Wales, northern parts of England and just through the Scottish borders. But across Ireland, western parts of Scotland, cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle and turning quite blustery under those cloudier skies too. So feeling cooler here, but where you do catch the sunshine across the south and southeast, that's where we'll see highs of 16, 17, and that's where it's going to be feeling warm in those lighter winds too. So as we head into the evening, those outbreaks of rain will continue to push their way into parts of western Scotland. So quite a damp end to the day. And similar across the rest of Northern Ireland, fairly cloudy with those outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Across parts of Wales, southern parts of England and across eastern parts too, it is generally going to be remaining dry, but feeling quite cold as soon as that sun goes down. So likely we could see a spot of frost once again, perhaps even some mist and fog patches under the clearest skies, mainly in the far southeast. But across northern areas, once again, Scotland, Northern Ireland, just through across the Scottish borders, another cloudy night with those outbreaks of rain, and they may just start to turn quite heavy in western parts by the time we reach Saturday morning. And once again, fairly blustery under those cloudier skies too. So for the first part of the weekend, a little bit of a split, that wet weather continuing in northern areas, but still plenty of fine and dry weather on offer to start the weekend. We will start to see a bit of a change, though, from the southwest later on. Notice these brighter spells, so some heavy rain on its way across the southwest later into Saturday. But once again, where you catch the sunshine, it will feel warm.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello, good morning to you. I'm Jules Buckley. Well, there's 3 issues on the go for the A1M at the moment, northbound. Firstly, a lane shut from Doncaster up to Mar, junction 36 to 37. Slow going in emergency repairs. A lane then closed northbound, Bowburn up to Carville, 61 to 62 at the scene of a collision. It was already slow on that stretch because of an issue then from Carville up to Chester Street. Junction 62 to 63 northbound is closed at the scene of a vehicle fire. So major queues on that stretch of the A1M northbound. Berkshire westbound M4 14 to 15, thus Hungerford towards Swindon East is closed off, still in queuing for emergency repairs there. And the anti-clockwise side of the M25, there's a broken down car. It's blocking lane 1 of the right-hand Dartford Tunnel, and that's causing queues too. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 39 minutes past midday. Now, 2 Met police officers sacked over a stop and search involving British athlete Bianca Williams have been handed their jobs back.
Yes, the officers appealed the decision against a ruling that they lied. They said they could smell cannabis during a stop and search of Miss Williams and her partner. PC's Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks will also now receive back pay after winning their appeal. It's been about 4 years, hasn't it?
4 long years.
Since the episode. Shall we speak with former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley about this one? Peter, remind us of how this all came about. These 2 police officers were sacked because Bianca Williams and her partner claimed that they were unfairly stopped and searched. The police said they could smell cannabis, but then it was ruled that that was a lie. Now things have changed.
Yes, they have, and I welcome today's ruling, which means that these 2 police officers will finally get their jobs back, having suffered the ignominy of trial by social media soon after this case started, then a police misconduct panel, which sacks them, and then finally today, the Police Appeals Tribunal, which ruled that original decision irrational, inconsistent, and so the officers have got their jobs back. Now, these officers were part of the territorial support group in the Metropolitan Police. They are very much frontline cops. They go where they're most needed, generally speaking. They are proactive. They make many, many arrests, seize weapons, drugs, guns, all manner of stuff. They're pretty hard-working police officers. And consequently, because they're at the front line, they deal with a lot of the messy side of policing. They end up rolling around on the pavements with robbers, burglars, thieves and the such like. and we as the public owe them a great debt. This whole event stemmed from when the police officers said they tried to stop a car in which these two athletes were travelling, and the vehicle failed to stop. There was then a chase with some pretty appalling driving before they were eventually taken from the car, searched, nothing was found, but then this whole very sorry, long saga began.
Of course, the reason why this saga began is it does tug on the heartstrings. It's the stereotype of the police see two black people in a nice car and want to stop them because they must be up to no good. That's sort of the impression that was first given off with regard to this story. It's sort of easy to see how this escalated.
Well, your words, not mine, and that's a perception by people who have no grasp whatsoever of the challenges and the mindset of frontline policing in 2024. That kind of thinking would have applied in 1978 when I was a uniformed cop and the police was absolutely riddled with some hugely abominable and unacceptable racism. And whilst policing is far from perfect these days, it fortunately has been reduced dramatically. There is some way to go, I will accept that. But this story highlights many issues, but predominantly with our streets becoming increasingly lawless. Don't wear a watch out for a night out in London. You'll quite possibly be robbed for it. Don't take your mobile phone out on the streets of London. Somebody will snatch it, your handbag, your purse, and the list goes on and on and on and on. If the public, the politicians, and the media want something done about this, then they must support our frontline cops. Not give them carte blanche to behave appallingly, of course not, but they need to be supported when they police robustly and properly. Because I, for one, would rather have the police controlling the streets than the current situation where criminals run rampant.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, what do you make of their response? They've given a statement. They say the appeal decision is disappointing. They say our drive home from training in 2020 with our baby should never have turned into a violent incident where we were wrongly accused of smelling of drugs. They go on to say we're professional athletes. We pride ourselves on not doing drugs. Actions and allegations of the officers were completely unacceptable. The IOPC were clear that all four officers lied. How come the IOPC came to the conclusion that the four officers lied, and then that seems to have been completely U-turned here?
There has been a full, thorough hearing and a testing of all the evidence in a police appeals tribunal, who have come to their decision, which I welcome. Let me just say this, it's Friday night, the end of a long week. I should be going for a drink tonight, and when I need a lift home, if you look at Miss Williams' driving record, it is appalling. I know that I would rather be driven home by one of those police officers than Miss Williams.
Right, OK. Well, Peter Bexley, thank you very much indeed for your time. Former Scotland Yard detective, thank you. Yes, I do remember that blowing up massively in the media.
But, of course, we didn't get all the context about how they didn't stop for the car immediately. And one would have thought that they wouldn't have been arrested and the car might not have been searched if a police car tells you to stop, you stop. Why wouldn't you stop?
Yeah, that would have been the simple decision to make at that point. Anyway, let us know your thoughts. GBNews.com/your say. Do we back police officers enough in their difficult job that they do? This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show, including, of course, the unfolding conflict in the Middle East. It's causing severe international travel disruption. How could you be affected? We're also going to be reflecting on the Ayatollah in Iran, the supreme leader's rant, I would say.
Warmongering rant.
Warmongering rant. That's
really concerning.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
You know, is the fact that electric blanket sales going up actually a good thing? This means that people are switched on to the problems that the winter might hold, that they might have some defence against it, or is it a real indictment of a Labour government that they aren't going to be able to, you know, support elderly people in their hour of need?
Good morning, by the way.
Morning.
I think the sale of electric blankets may well be because we've had this cold snap because of the Arctic weather coming in from the north. However, I think it's an absolute reality that, as your clip said, that over 800,000 elderly people who are eligible for the winter fuel allowance, who can get pension credits, are struggling to apply. And so what is absolutely essential at the moment is that all of those older people who are eligible for pension credits do apply and do get what's owed to them. The benefits are owed to them. And the average that people will get through pension credits is about £78 a week. So that's definitely going to make a massive difference to people who are really struggling.
What can organisations like yours do to encourage people to, I guess, educate themselves on technology and make that first step into the digital world, which is very intimidating at times?
Absolutely, and that's what we do at Good Things Foundation. So we're a national charity. We work all across the whole of the UK. And in your clip there, you had Links Digital, and they're a member of what we call the National Digital Inclusion Network, which is a network of local charities, small local community organisations, food banks, job centres, old people's clubs. So anyone, any organisation at that local level.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 49 minutes past midday. Now, the unfolding conflict in the Middle East is causing severe international travel disruption, with connecting flights at Dubai, Doha and Abu Dhabi all under severe strain.
Yes, since the Iranian missile attack on Israel on Tuesday, airspaces have been closed, airlines are taking much longer routings, and dozens of flights have been diverted.
Well, passengers can expect to wait several days now for their onward flights.
OK, well, for more on this, we're joined by travel correspondent for The Independent, Simon Calder, in the studio. How lucky are we?
Yeah, delighted to see you here rather than in some far-flung airport or train station, as is normally the case.
Very nice to be here and see you both. But yeah, a lot of people travelling, a lot of people will be watching this. They've got trips booked. They're wondering what's going to happen. Now, absolutely, as you say, Tuesday night going into Wednesday, when we saw that missile attack from Iran over Iraqi airspace into Israel, immediately the airspace got shut down for both Iran and Iraq. Previous to that, airlines were flying typically over northern Turkey. They'd avoid Syria, but then as soon as they got to Iraq or Iran, they would track over those countries, either eastern Iraq or western Iran, and get to the Gulf, to Doha for Qatar Airways, for Abu Dhabi on Etihad, and for, of course, Dubai on Emirates. And that's the way they've been working pretty much since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which forced them to go a little bit further south. Now we are seeing a lot of airlines just saying, OK, we're going to avoid that area completely, as a result of which they are now typically going from the UK, and we're talking here about dozens of planes carrying thousands of people every day. They're going south over Egypt, they're then going over central Saudi Arabia. That adds 30, 40 minutes to the typical flight time. You got that on the way there and on the way back. You're talking about a lot of misconnections.
You are, Simon. We're just looking on our screens, or we have been looking on our screens, of those missiles raining down on Israel. I mean, I know everyone hates a delay, but if it avoids you flying through this, I suppose it makes a lot of sense.
Well, of course. And look, we have seen in the past 10 years a couple of terrible tragedies. The first one, of course, was MH17 flying over eastern Ukraine. It was down by a Russian missile fired, we think, by separatists. And then there was another flight going from Tehran, which took off and was shot down mistakenly by the Revolutionary Guard, who thought it was an American missile. So there is, absolutely, everybody wants to avoid these possible risks, and so they're taking these longer tracks. There's also a lot of concern. People have been in touch with me about Egypt, about Jordan, about Cyprus. I'm saying, please go there. There's no reason to cancel your trip, but there is widening concern. And added to which, and you've been reporting this, the possibility of oil prices spiking, that is going to have a very serious effect on international aviation as well. And of course, with the terrible unfolding humanitarian disaster in Lebanon and elsewhere in the Middle East, you might think flights are very, very much down the pecking order in terms of importance. Absolutely right. But a lot of people are being affected and a lot of people are concerned.
Well, they are very important, aren't they? They keep things going. It's not all just holidays, is it?
Well,
and frivolous trips. I'm just reading here. Can this be true that 1,245,000 Brits visit Dubai every year?
Oh, yes, an extremely popular place, yes. And I've been checking out what the warnings are from the UK government, the Foreign Office. They're basically just saying anywhere in the Gulf region, be aware of the heightened risk of terrorist attacks. These could target Westerners in particular, but they're stopping well short of saying don't go to those places. And the same applies to Jordan and to Egypt. Of course, most of the countries involved, so particularly Lebanon, Israel, and of course Syria, where a terrible civil war has been dragging on. There's a no-go warning from the Foreign Office, and of course many people still trying to get out of Lebanon, British citizens. We had another flight coming in yesterday. I don't think there's one today into Birmingham. Some people leaving the country, going through Syria against government advice, trying to get into Turkey to get a flight back from there.
Goodness me, it does feel like in some ways that global interconnectivity is going backwards now. Longer to get to Dubai, longer therefore to get to Japan or Australia or anywhere else. Simon, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for talking through the knock-on effects that you don't immediately think about when you see that missile barrage. But of course, there are global knock-on effects. But Iran's warmongering supreme leader is calling on Muslim nations to prepare against their common enemy. More on that after this.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, there's going to be plenty of fine and dry weather across the country and feeling warm where you do catch the sunshine. Away from the northwest, though, where we do have some wet and windy weather, and this is where low pressure is taking hold, moving into the northwest of the country, but still high pressure remaining dominant across much of England and Wales, bringing us that fine weather to end the working week. So plenty of sunny spells across England, Wales, northern parts of England and just through the Scottish borders, but across Ireland, western parts of Scotland, cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle and turning quite blustery under those cloudier skies too. So feeling cooler here, but where you do catch the sunshine across the south and southeast, that's where we'll see highs of 16, 17, and that's where it's going to be feeling warm in those lighter winds too. So as we head into the evening, those outbreaks of rain will continue to push their way into parts of western Scotland. So quite a damp end to the day. And similar across the rest of Northern Ireland, fairly cloudy with those outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Across parts of Wales, southern parts of England and across eastern parts too, it is generally going to be remaining dry, but feeling quite cold as soon as that sun goes down. So likely we could see a spot of frost once again, perhaps even some mist and fog patches under the clearest skies, mainly in the far southeast. But across northern areas, once again, Scotland, Northern Ireland, just through across the Scottish borders, another cloudy night with those outbreaks of rain, and they may just start to turn quite heavy in western parts by the time we reach Saturday morning. And once again, fairly blustery under those cloudier skies too. So for the first part of the weekend, a little bit of a split, that wet weather continuing in northern areas, but still plenty of fine and dry weather on offer to start the weekend. We will start to see a bit of a change, though, from the southwest later on. Notice these brighter spells, so some heavy rain on its way across the southwest later into Saturday. But once again, where you catch the sunshine, it will feel warm.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar.
There's still. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We are now delighted to be joined by comedian and my beautiful friend, Francine Lewis, who's here to share with us her upcoming book, The Last Laugh, and an exciting competition in collaboration with none other than that mean Simon Cowell. Francine,
he's not so mean anymore.
Oh, is he not?
He's not. And do you know what?
Having a child, is it maybe?
Definitely. It's really weird because I really liked Simon. He was nasty. I just found that, I don't know, quite sexy. Now he's way too nice. Way too nice.
That's what they say, isn't it? You get all the nice guys say, I never get any luck with women, and they always say I'm too nice.
Do you know what? The truth is, I've always thought Simon was lovely. He's such a nice guy. Like, when I was doing Britain's Got Talent, I was very, very excited, you know, to meet Simon again, because it was the second time I'd actually met him. And I always thought he was such a charming, lovely man.
Of course, you are more recently well known for BGT and your impressions and whatnot.
Do you know what? I do watch a lot of reality TV, a lot of that sort of stuff.
What do you watch?
I love Towie, whenever it's Love Island. So, seriously, honeys, 100% definitely. You got to watch Essie. It's all about Towie. Love it, seriously. So I'm always doing, you know, whatever the new reality shows are.
Another favourite is Katie Price, and we've got a video. I think we've got a selfie video of us doing.
Have we?
Yeah, we have. From
I'm showing
years ago.
Tatiana to Katie Price, which she does amazingly. Come on, Tatiana, let's...
No, I don't.
Tatiana!
There's a mixture between Katie Price and Tatiana.
What do you think? I love when people take me off. It shows what a big star I am.
It's the lick of the lips.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 4th of October. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Well, decarbonisation or deindustrialisation, Sir Keir Starmer insists he will not sacrifice British industry to eco-zealots. This as he pledges a whopping £22 billion for green technologies. Is carbon capture enough to keep British industry alive?
Are the Falklands next? Renewed fears over the future of the Falklands today, and Gibraltar for that matter, after the government's decision to surrender control of the Chagos Islands. This as Boris Johnson slams the move as crazy.
And a raging Ayatollah, Iran's warmongering supreme leader, calls on Muslim nations to prepare against their common enemy, labelling the recent ballistic missile onslaught on Israel the minimum punishment for what he calls its bloodthirsty vampire regime.
It's strange that the government's big move today is to talk about carbon capture and storage, which seems to be the one issue that people who are anti-net zero and those most fervently in favour of net zero both seem to hate.
So why don't the eco-zealots like it then? It's capturing carbon, isn't that a good thing?
They think that this is what the big oil and gas companies want, because then they can go ahead and drill the oil and pump the gas and we can use it and it's fine because we'll capture the storage. They don't believe that it's possible.
Or indeed capture the carbon in the storage.
That's exactly
and keep it in storage. But I heard that actually it loses a lot of the energy. For example, if you have an industrial process and you get X amount of energy out of it, by capturing the carbon, you lose quite a lot of that energy. Well, so actually you end up producing less energy, which obviously is not a good thing, considering we don't produce much.
This is why the people on the sort of anti-net zero side don't like it, because it's a less efficient way to produce energy, of course, if it works at all. And those on the pro-net zero side of things, well, they're not really pro-net zero, are they? They're just pro-zero-zero. They just don't want any carbon-producing energy at all. But I suppose the whole point of net zero is that there's a net there. So you can still have oil and gas, and you can still power things that way as long as you capture it. That's what the government's arguing today, but they seem to have annoyed two sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, and with, you know, Port Talbot, Scunthorpe, North Sea oil and gas losing jobs up there, can he really stand there and say, you know what, I'm not going to be sacrificing any more British industry on the altar of net zero? Well, hang on a minute, it's already happening. Ed Miliband's already said absolutely no more oil and gas licences in the North Sea. OK, we'll just export our carbon emissions. We'll just import our oil and gas. Great, brilliant.
Yeah, that's a really... How does this... Surely we should... If we're having all of this carbon capture and storage, surely we can drill, baby, drill now.
Well, apparently not. Can't have anything nice. Anyway, get in touch. gbnews.com/your say is the way to do so. But let's get the headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It is exactly 1:03. The top stories from the newsroom this lunchtime. Sir Keir Starmer has announced what he calls a game-changing £22 billion funding package for projects that capture and store carbon emissions. Speaking to workers in Liverpool earlier, he said that investment in so-called carbon capture clusters will create thousands of jobs, bring investment and help meet climate goals. But Green campaigners are warning the move could prolong oil and gas production, with the projects not set to begin storing carbon until at least 2028. Well, following his speech in Liverpool, our political correspondent Catherine Forster challenged the Prime Minister over the cost of that transition to so-called clean and green energy.
With renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs.
Turning to the Middle East now, and the UK is sending another £10 million in aid to Lebanon and urging Britons to leave immediately as the conflict there escalates. It follows a night of massive blasts in Beirut, the Lebanese capital, and this was the moment giant explosions were seen near the city's airport. Well, in the past 24 hours, at least 45 people have died across Lebanon as Israel launched its most intense airstrikes on the capital so far. Israeli forces are also escalating their ground operations in the south, targeting Hezbollah militants. You can see their live pictures of the skyline above Beirut with clouds of smoke hanging in the air. Meanwhile, we're also hearing reports this afternoon that Iran plans to target Israeli energy and gas supplies if Israel conducts retaliatory missile attacks. In Gaza, meanwhile, airstrikes have pushed the death toll to now almost 42,000 since the conflict began. In other news, the government's being warned its deal to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius could put more overseas territories at risk. It comes as Argentina is now pledging to gain full sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. However, Britain insists its commitment to the Falklands is unwavering. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us he thinks the Chagos deal is crazy.
Islands being given back to Mauritius. Your reaction?
Crazy. I mean, I urge viewers of GB News to get out your maps, get out your atlases, check out the Chagos Islands, see where they are, see where Mauritius is. A long way away.
Yes.
What is this claim? It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Why are we doing this? Sheer political correctness.
Two former Met police officers have been reinstated after being sacked for allegedly lying about smelling cannabis during a stop and search. Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks stopped athletes Bianca Williams and her partner Ricardo dos Santos in 2020. The Police Appeals Tribunal, though, has overturned their dismissal, calling the original ruling irrational and inconsistent. Well, Williams and dos Santos have said in the last hour that the decision is disappointing and that they plan to challenge it in court. The officers will return to the Metropolitan Force with back pay. It's been confirmed that British tech tycoon Mike Lynch drowned when his super yacht sank off the coast of Sicily. An inquest opened this morning confirmed the 59-year-old's cause of death, but post-mortem for his daughter Hannah remains inconclusive. The two were among 7 killed when the vessel was caught in a storm in August, including Morgan Stanley International Chairman Jonathan Bloomer and his wife Judy. The investigation is continuing with the next hearing scheduled for April next year. The Health Secretary is calling on GPs to help make the NHS fit for the future, urging an end to their collective protest action, something he says is only punishing patients. It comes as new figures from August have revealed that 1 in 20 GP appointments were either held online or via video, sparking debate over whether it's increasing access or compromising patient care. Well, speaking in Liverpool this morning, Wes Streeting told the Royal College of GPs conference that collaboration and collective ethos are both vital to rebuild the NHS.
3 shifts that underpin this government's reform agenda, from hospital to community, analogue to digital, sickness to prevention. Those shifts are not new ideas and they are not radical, but delivering them really would be. I can't do it on my own. I need every part of the NHS to pull together as one team with one purpose, to be the generation that took the NHS from the worst crisis in its history, got it back on its feet and made it fit for the future.
And finally, the world's first ovarian cancer vaccine being developed here in the UK could wipe out the disease, according to scientists in Oxford. Ovarian Vax trains the immune system to detect and then attack the earliest signs of the disease. Cancer Research UK is backing the project and calls it an exciting step forward in cancer prevention. Although full approval is still years away, clinical trials could begin as soon as the next 4 to 5 years. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you for another roundup in about half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 9 minutes past 1. Now, there's been a big net zero announcement today. The Labour government is investing £22 billion in carbon capture and storage. This is the politics of national renewal, according to Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah, speaking at a glass-making factory in Cheshire, the Prime Minister stated that the move is reigniting our industrial heartlands by investing in the industry of the future, and that the necessary mission of decarbonisation does not mean deindustrialisation.
OK, well, let's get more with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who was there to listen to Keir Starmer's speech. Catherine, is there an indication of how much, how much carbon is going to be reduced from this, or how many jobs are going to come of this? Because £22 billion, it's a lot of money to invest.
It is a lot of money. Good afternoon, Tom and Emily. It's a lot of money, 22 billion, but this is over a 25-year period. They're saying that it's going to bring 4,000 direct jobs and support 50,000 jobs in the long term. They're also saying that it's going to help remove 8.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide every year from the atmosphere. From 2028, that's the year that they hope to get all of this going. Now, we're at this glass-making factory not far from Ellesmere Port on the south side of the Mersey. They've come here because industries like glass making, cement, steel, etc. Use a lot of energy. Their argument is that in doing this carbon capture and storage, it means that they can keep some of this sort of heavy industry, some of those industrial jobs that might otherwise have been lost, keep them in the UK and basically take the carbon dioxide and squirrel it away underground. They say there's huge capacity to do that in the United Kingdom. They're also saying that it's going to mean that skilled jobs that exist are going to be able to stay in these areas. Sir Keir Starmer spoke about working as a lawyer when the coal mines were disappearing and talking about how miners were basically told to get on their bike to go and find other jobs. He said that they would never see that happen again. I think a lot of questions, though, beyond the sort of rhetoric of how do you get private investment, really? Who's going to pick up the tab for this? And also, of course, what people want to know is when their energy bills are going to start to fall, because Labour did pledge that they wanted their policies to bring £300 a year off people's energy bills. I said to the Prime Minister, given this is all going to be very expensive, given the cuts to the winter fuel allowance, the rise in the energy price cap, aren't our bills just going to go up in the short term? Let's have a look at what he said.
Yes, that is partly caused by international issues, but it was worse in this country because we didn't stabilise the economy, we didn't invest in renewables years ago. Because with renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs. And that's why this investment is so important. There is always the challenge of the short term versus the long term. But if you never do the long term decisions, you will always have the short term problems.
It's interesting, Catherine, to hear the Prime Minister talk to you about these jobs. You say 4,000 direct jobs from this investment. I've just done some quick back of a fag packet maths here. 22 billion divided by 4,000. That's £5.5 million per job. I mean, are these? I don't.
It's an expensive job creation scheme.
I'm in the wrong industry. I need to get into glass making. £5.5 million per job.
Well, they're saying it's going to support another 50,000. And of course, it is a concern, isn't it? Because we've seen 2,500 jobs go with the closure of Port Talbot. There's other jobs going to go in the North Sea. Many people very concerned that the green transition is going to lead to an awful lot of job losses. The government would have us believe that, in fact, it's going to create a lot of jobs. One thing I think worth mentioning too, I also asked him about the Chagos Islands. Specifically, Argentina are now saying they want the Falklands back. I asked him if he could guarantee that Labour wouldn't be giving away any more of our overseas territories. He answered with a non-answer, really, about important to keep the military base. But I very quickly had a clarification from Number 10 after that, saying Chagos does not change our policy or approach to other overseas territories.
Interesting stuff. Do we have a clip of that by any chance? No, we don't. OK, we'll get to that later, Catherine. We'll bring up that because I'm very interested to see the Prime Minister's non-answer that he initially gave before that clarification. We'll be back with you later in the programme. Catherine Forster, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, if it is a non-answer, then he's certainly leaving it open. You know, if you don't rule something out as a politician, it's a possibility, isn't it? We learnt that.
Maybe it just speaks more to his mindset, because obviously Number 10 then clarified that he does rule it out. But if his immediate default is to do a non-answer, perhaps that sort of leads you to the sort of mindset that has led to this abandonment of these islands in the first place.
He's just being evasive. Let's bring in Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at Imperial College, Malcolm Grimston. Thank you very much indeed, Malcolm. This £22 billion, it will pay for 4,000 jobs. OK, good. We're losing a lot of jobs in the fossil fuel industries, of course we are. Is this the type of thing that we should be investing so much money in?
I think carbon capture and storage is going to have to play an important part globally. In this country, we've just stopped using coal for electricity just last week, but reducing some of the emissions from gas would be a good thing. But of course, what we're doing in Europe is dwarfed by the increase in emissions from the coal industries of China and India. And someone, I think, has to seriously get into things saying we're not going to stop those countries using coal, but we may be able to work with them to reduce the most serious effects of coal, which include the emissions of carbon. So I think globally we need to be looking very seriously at carbon capture and storage. Actually, my most cited paper was 2001, was about carbon capture and storage. And I had a quick look back at it now. Actually, there's not all that much has changed over the last 20-odd years. This isn't an easy technology, but it could be an important one.
Well, this is the thing. Have we not tried this technology before? I believe the previous government did try to get this going in Aberdeenshire, and it didn't go ahead for various reasons. Do you know why? Was it the cost? Was it the efficiency? Was it not value for money?
I mean, like with many of these things, we've actually been doing it for decades. Carbon capture and storage started off in the oil industry in the 70s as a way of pumping carbon dioxide into oil reserves to squeeze more oil out of them, and the carbon then stayed put. So if it were very easy to do, we would have been doing this in a huge way in future. It is expensive. What's more, most technologies, you've got the possibility of hitting the jackpot. You might just, with a new nuclear technology or a new renewable technology, come up with something that's genuinely cheaper than what you're doing at the moment and gives you lower carbon at the same time. Carbon capture and storage is always going to be an on-cost. There's no product apart from removing the carbon, and that will never be anything but an added cost. And I think all of these matters, and the fact, as in your introduction you were saying, it hasn't got terribly many friends on either side of the argument. And clearly when that's the case, things tend not to proceed. You need real advocates for any new technology, and CCS hasn't really got that.
Malcolm, you're an expert in these matters. Does it work? And if so, how does it work? Because I've heard voices on the left and on the right say it's a nonsense technology, it doesn't work. Is that just partisanship?
No, I mean, the main research project so far actually was done by Statoil in the North Sea, where they sequestered carbon in one of its gas fields there. It does work. There's 3 stages to it. You've got to strip the carbon out of the waste stream that you're doing. Now, you might do that by freezing the carbon out, or by getting it to stick to various things that carbon is sticky, or by dissolving it in what they call alkaline solutions like amines. You've then got to reconstitute it and transport it to where you're taking it. That tends to be fairly cheap and straightforward. But then you've got to have a store for it where it's not going to bubble out in 100 years' time. So you've got to have a very robust store. There are geological places like that. You add all of those processes together, and at the moment it is still the separating out, the stripping out of the carbon that is the most expensive of those 3 processes. If we could find, and part of the research that's going on here will be a matter of trying to find cheaper and more efficient ways of doing it. At the moment, though, it doesn't remove all the carbon, and indeed it's very difficult to imagine it ever will. A very good scheme might be removing somewhere between 80 and 90% of the carbon, which is worth doing, but we're never going to get to complete zero with carbon capture and storage.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for your expertise, Malcolm Grimston there. Our whole net zero policy relies on all the other countries in the world signing up to the same idea, right? Carbon capture and storage in this country is not going to have an impact on the global temperature, is it? Or on global carbon emissions, really. We account for so little of those. So I just don't see the point necessarily of spending so much money on this type of technology that we don't even know if it's going to make that much of a difference, while other countries are pumping more and more and more into the atmosphere. I mean,
here's the most positive thing I can think about it. If we are this sort of laboratory, the £5 million jobs, if we're this laboratory and actually the money goes into more research than building, if we crack some way to do this very, very cheaply, and then we sell that around the world, I'm trying to think of the most positive way, because otherwise, what Malcolm Grimston there, the expert, was saying, at best, carbon capture and storage gets 80% or maybe 90% of carbon. So do we need to rename the whole process, not net zero, but net 10%?
But why do we always have to fund it? I mean, if there is this amazing technology, if carbon capture and storage is so amazing and it's going to be transformative for our world and our country and everything, then why wouldn't private companies want a bit of the action? Why can't they, you know, stump up the 22 billion? I'm just thinking about all this money and all the tax we're already paying.
Well, I mean, I suppose they would, had we just put a price on... If we had a proper carbon tax... Then to avoid paying the tax, they might do the investment. But instead, we've got these roundabout crazy schemes where we don't just put a simple price on carbon. We try to subsidise this, pick that winner, lots of government involvement.
I just think they're going crazy with the old credit card. And it's my credit card in part. Your credit card in part. Is everyone at home's
But don't worry,
card?
we're creating 4,000 jobs, so that's all very
How many have we lost in the North Sea?
Many more.
How many have we lost Tata Steel? Anyway, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Perhaps you disagree. Perhaps you think carbon capture and storage probably is a good use of our money. But let us know. gbnews.com/your say. We've got lots more coming up, including a fascinating story of a fraud victim who's now voicing concerns that the Labour government has failed to understand poor governance in Mauritius.
Yes, this follows the decision to hand the Chagos Islands to the East African island nation. We're going to get more on this governance story. It's fascinating after this short break.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're talking catchphrases and jingles because, of course, instantly recognisable and sometimes a little annoying in the case of the Go Compare one, perhaps. An iconic advertising jingle can stay in your head all day and sometimes stand the test of time. Sound expert and music designer for some of the world's most renowned companies, Michael Boumendil, joins us now. Good morning, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
First of all, what is the secret ingredient, the secret recipe for a hit jingle that stands the test of time over the decades?
Well, I have to say the secret 100 years ago is not the secret today, because today all the brands are using music. So the first secret is to stand out. It's just to make something different, to do something interesting. The other thing I believe is to do something that is true to the brand, that is talking to you. You know, it's not only about the memorability, but it's about telling something about the brand. You know, when I hear you, your voice, your tone of voice says not only who you are, I can recognize your voice, but it says a lot about your mood, your personality. So the other reason why we make successful jingles is because they're catchy, because they're different, but also because they say something to us that is interesting, and finally keeping this link between the brand and the customers.
Michael, tell us about your involvement in the new Maybelline jingle. This makes me, I mean, I haven't heard it, but it makes me a little bit sad because I was an avid Maybelline concealer user for many years. Other brands are available, but the jingle was the main reason why I got bought into it.
You don't have to be sad, because we kept most of the legacy.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday when I interview one of the most significant political figures of our era, Boris Johnson. Nothing will be off limits as we discuss his autobiography, Unleashed, and everything in it.
I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit. And I'm very, very happy to be on Camilla Tominey's show, Boris Johnson on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. and again at 6 p.m.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 1. Now, after the decision to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, we really need to change that. It's not...
Nothing's going back to anyone?
No. Well, the Chagos Islands are being handed to Mauritius. And related to that story, David Franklin, a fraud victim, is voicing concerns that the new government has failed to understand the poor governance issues in this country.
Yes, David's £3.3 million life savings were swindled by fraudsters in Mauritius as he helped his wife battle cancer.
When he sought redress, he was told the fraud against him was karma and has since launched a legal bid to recover his money.
Well, to explain this all in more detail, we're joined by David Franklin himself. David, thank you very much indeed. Tell us briefly what happened.
Briefly, we transferred our pension to Mauritius by holding by a number of reputable management companies. My wife had some cancer issues on her spine, which we had to have emergency operation. Which was about 6 weeks of concern. And during that 6-week period, our entire life savings were transferred to China.
To China is the particularly fascinating issue here, because we're told by the government there's nothing to see here. British assets in the Chagos Islands will be secured. Mauritius will control the islands. Mauritius, of course, is an ally of China. Are you saying that the government might be naive in its dealings with Mauritius here?
I think that the government is extremely naive about dealing with Mauritius. Mauritius is smoke and mirrors. The financial institutes, which are meant to be independent, are entirely controlled by the political government. The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have significant influence over the outcome and control and the investigative powers that the institutes should have and must have. The grey list, which is the worldwide list on how companies are judged on their investment abilities and financial regularities, came off the grey list about 2 years ago. And at the same time, all of the fraud issues that I am being faced with have been swept under the carpet.
So essentially... We've ceded control of these islands to a corrupt nation. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that the government itself is corrupt. The Mauritius people are lovely, lovely people, but they are controlled by and have in place a government which has been there for some period of time and have had a series of corruption and scandal issues which have never really been investigated and have effectively been controlled and stopped.
David, yours is a shocking story. £3.3 million invested in goodwill, stolen, shipped off to China, all while your wife has been battling cancer. I mean, my heart goes out to you, David. What are you doing now?
Well, this occurred about 5 years ago. And then we've been in court battles and legal action for the last 4 to 5 years. The political system controls everything in Mauritius. The legal system is, to be honest with you, a joke. And some of our cases have been operating for 4 years. I'm told by my legal team that we may have another 3 to 4 years to go. By that time, I'll be well into my 70s.
Well, it must be extremely costly for you. David, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. David Franklin, and good luck to you, we must say. David Franklin, thank you very much indeed. Well, there's another reason why it looks like a rather naive decision from our government.
I think naivety is the biggest word here, this sort of idea that we've walked into a deal with a country that is clearly not a developed country, a country that is clearly very close to our strategic foe, China.
Yeah.
And what have we got back for it? We've handed over these islands to Mauritius, a country that just steals money from Brits, amongst other things. And what do we have in return?
Not a lot.
We're paying them.
For the privilege.
We're paying them to keep this US-UK military base on one of the islands. I mean, I do not understand how anyone at the top of the Foreign Office could sign this off and think this is a good deal for Britain. It's not.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Some breaking news in the last couple of hours that 2 former Met police officers have been handed back their jobs after winning an appeal. This all surrounds the stop and search of British athlete Bianca Williams roughly 4 years ago. We're going to have more details after the headlines.
Very good afternoon from the newsroom. Leading the news this lunchtime, Sir Keir Starmer's announced what he calls a game-changing £22 billion funding package for projects that capture and store carbon emissions. Speaking to workers in Liverpool earlier, he said the investment in so-called carbon capture clusters will create thousands of jobs, bring in investment and help meet climate goals. But Green campaigners are warning the move could prolong oil and gas production, with the projects not set to begin storing carbon until at least 2028. Well, following that speech, our political correspondent Catherine Forster challenged the Prime Minister over the cost of the transition to so-called green and clean energy.
With renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs.
The UK is sending another £10 million in aid to Lebanon and is urging Britons to leave now as the conflict escalates. It follows a night of massive blasts in Beirut. Take a listen. Well, in the past 24 hours, at least 45 people are now known to have died across Lebanon as Israel launched its most intense airstrikes on the Lebanese capital. Israeli forces are also escalating ground operations in the south of Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah militants there. Meanwhile, we've also heard in the last hour or so reports that Iran plans to target Israeli energy and gas supplies if, they say, Israel conducts retaliatory missile attacks. And in Gaza, airstrikes there have pushed the death toll to over 41,000 since the conflict began. Downing Street insists its deal to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius does not change its approach to other overseas territories. Sir Keir Starmer's also defended giving up control of the Chagos Islands as the decision prompted Argentina to vow that it will gain full sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. However, the government here insists its commitment to the Falklands is unwavering. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us he thinks the Chagos deal is crazy.
Chagos Islands being given back to Mauritius. Your reaction?
Crazy. I mean, I urge viewers of GB News to get out your maps, get out your atlases, check out the Chagos Islands, see where they are, see where Mauritius is. A long way away.
Yes.
What is this claim? It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Why are we doing this? Sheer political correctness.
And finally, a reminder of that story Emily mentioned just a few moments ago, that 2 former Met police officers have been reinstated after being sacked for allegedly lying about smelling cannabis during a stop and search. Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks stopped athletes Bianca Williams and her partner Ricardo dos Santos in 2020. The Police Appeals Tribunal overturned that dismissal, though, calling the original ruling irrational and inconsistent. Williams and dos Santos have both said the decision is disappointing and that they plan to challenge it in court. That's the latest from the newsroom for now. I'll be back with you for a full roundup at 2 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
$70 and 1.1940 euros. The price of gold, £2,018 and 20 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,242 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, there's going to be plenty of fine and dry weather across the country and feeling warm where you do catch the sunshine. Away from the northwest though, where we do have some wet and windy weather, and this is where low pressure is taking hold, moving into the northwest of the country, but still high pressure remaining dominant across much of England and Wales, bringing us that fine weather to end the working week. So plenty of sunny spells across England, Wales, northern parts of England and just through the Scottish borders, but across Ireland, western parts of Scotland, cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle and turning quite blustery under those cloudier skies too. So feeling cooler here, but where you do catch the sunshine across the south and southeast, that's where we'll see highs of 16, 17, and that's where it's going to be feeling warm in those lighter winds too. So as we head into the evening, those outbreaks of rain will continue to push their way into parts of western Scotland. So quite a damp end to the day. And similar across the rest of Northern Ireland, fairly cloudy with those outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Across parts of Wales, southern parts of England and across eastern parts too, it is generally going to be remaining dry, but feeling quite cold as soon as that sun goes down. So likely we could see a spot of frost once again, perhaps even some mist and fog patches under the clearest skies, mainly in the far southeast. But across northern areas, once again, Scotland, Northern Ireland, just through across the Scottish borders, another cloudy night with those outbreaks of rain, and they may just start to turn quite heavy in western parts by the time we reach Saturday morning. And once again, fairly blustery under those cloudier skies too. So for the first part of the weekend, a little bit of a split, that wet weather continuing in northern areas, but still plenty of fine and dry weather on offer to start the weekend. We will start to see a bit of a change though from the southwest later on. Notice these brighter spells, so some heavy rain on its way across the southwest later into Saturday. But once again, where you catch the sunshine, it will feel warm.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello to you. I'm Jules Buckley. Still several issues if you're heading north up the A1M at this lunchtime. Firstly, the stretch from junction 61 to 62, that's Boburn up to Carville, remains blocked and big queues at the scene of a collision. Emergency repairs northbound 36 Doncaster through towards Mar 37, so a lane shut, and delays also northbound on the A1M just before Stevenage south of junction 7. An obstruction means that's part blocked and queuing as well. The northbound M6 from the M5 at 8 to Wednesbury at 9 is slow going. It follows an earlier breakdown. All the lanes are back open. And the westbound side of the M4, well, there's emergency repairs ongoing, so it's closed westbound Hungerford to junction 14 to Swindon east at 15, queuing back through Hungerford as traffic diverts. And for now, that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 39 minutes past 1. Now, 2 Metropolitan Police officers sacked over a stop and search involving British athlete Bianca Williams have been handed their jobs back.
Yes, so the officers appealed the initial decision against a ruling that they lied by saying they could smell cannabis during a stop and search of Ms Williams and her partner. Now, the PC's Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks will also receive back pay after winning their appeal.
Well, we're joined now by the former police officer and director of the Law and Order Foundation, Norman Brennan. Now, Norman played an active role in helping these officers secure financial support through this ordeal. Norman, can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because this was 4 years ago now.
Well, the reason why I got involved in supporting the initial GoFundMe appeal, I saw it reach about 5,000 quid on the first day. And in my 45 years of policing and law and order, it's one of the most perverse decisions as a discipline hearing I've ever seen. And it looks as though the public certainly agreed, because within 4 days, we took the appeal from 5,000 to between 160 and 170,000, which was absolutely unbelievable. And many members of the public are the ones that contributed. Even people in the black community contacted me and said, I can't believe those officers were sacked. Now, it originally started when they stopped and searched. There were territorial support groups. So they're serious officers dealing with serious gun and knife crime and drugs. And they actually tried to stop Bianca Williams, who was the passenger, and also Don Santos, her partner. But he refused to stop. And he drove in such a way that he committed all sorts of road traffic offences, driving in a 20 mile an hour at double the speed limit, driving without due care and attention, and also equivalent to dangerous driving. They were legally stopped and they were spoken to. They were unhelpful, obstructive and belligerent. The officers overlooked the driving offences and thanked them for their help when they finally did stop. And that was the end of the matter. But they actually weren't happy with that, so they complained. The commissioner at the time, Cressida Dick, looked at all the evidence, the body-worn cameras, and exonerated the officers. But Bianca Williams wasn't happy with that. So she pushed it to the Police Independent Office of Complaints, and they initiated an investigation. So bringing us right up to date, you had a team of outstanding police officers, one of whom is Jonathan Clapham and also Sam Franks, that were put through the mill of hell. They were both sacked, and I think, to be quite honest and bring us right up to date, I'll just tell you what the chairman of the appeals hearing said today. He said, dedicated, hard-working and much respected officers, and the decision that the original panel made was irrational and inconsistent and ruined reputations, and these reputations were ruined by the original findings where both officers did not lie. Now that just says it all, doesn't it?
Norman, were these two officers accused at any point of being heavy-handed in their response there? We just saw the footage back from the incident over 4 years ago. The handcuffs were out. There was a lot of sort of pushing and that sort of thing. Is that one of the things that they complained about, Bianca Williams and her partner?
Yes, it was. And also that they were black. Well, if you actually saw the particular footage that I did, the windows were tinted, so the officers didn't even see how many people were in there, who was in there, and the behaviour of Santos that was actually driving was such that would immediately raise suspicion. I mean, let's be honest about it. If a police officer asks you or me to stop, we stop. What's it all about, officer? Well,
but did they need to get the handcuffs out?
Well, I was getting to that point. They actually pursued these for about a quarter of a mile. Now, when you pursue someone in a police vehicle with your blue lights and two-tones on, you actually think that someone may have something to hide because they are trying to get away. So when you stop them, you immediately restrain them and ensure that they don't get rid of any drugs or any weapons or anything else that we may find on them that may put them before the courts. So that's what the police officers did. But they were de-handcuffed, and everything was settled down within minutes. And to be quite honest with you, that was exceptional, well-trained police officers doing outstanding job. And two of them were punished for it by being dismissed.
Yeah, this is the crucial context, I suppose, because obviously this footage can go viral. People can see Bianca Williams just sort of got out of a car and immediately handcuffs put on her. In isolation, that looks horrific. But with the context of that 20-minute chase with blue flashing lights and the car refusing to stop, suddenly that puts it in an entirely different context.
Well, it does. It's just like so many videos that we see. Just look recently, the Metropolitan Police officer that stopped a belligerent black woman at Croydon railway station 2 years ago, he too was sacked. But when you actually saw the video and you actually heard the evidence, and I was being given the information from the courts, I know the criminal justice system inside out. I'd actually, in my career, done similar stops and arrested people. Even though she actually had the ticket, she refused to show it. But because she was black, she wasn't happy. And again, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner cleared that officer. But the Independent Office of Police Complaints, I think, have got a vendetta against police officers. They destroy officers' lives, they destroy officers' careers, and it has a retrospective effect on tens of thousands of other officers that think, I'm not going to take the risk on stop and searching through fear of losing my job. And when you think since 2009 till last year, stop and search went down from 1.5 million to 500,000. And I'm seeing cases every day of the week now. I even went to one last week where 2 officers' lives have been destroyed, waiting 2 years under investigation by the Office of Independent Police Conduct. One of the officers actually resigned. And do you know what? They did nothing wrong. The gross misconduct was dropped, but they had to find them guilty of something. They had handcuffs on a suspect for 1 minute or 2 minutes longer than they should have done. It's madness, and I'm telling you now, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Chief Constables, are failing frontline police officers. They're throwing them under the bus. And I think all these recent decisions against the Independent Office of Police Conduct that destroy officers' lives and careers, I believe that that organisation has been brought into disrepute and it must be disbanded with one that the police and the public and victims have actually got faith in, because none of us have at the moment.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Norman Brennan. Good to speak to you. Thank you. Right, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show, including the former footballer and TV pundit, your favourite, Gary Lineker. His BBC future is very much up in the air. Would you be happy to see the back of him at this stage, or would you sorely miss him on Match of the Day? That's next.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Right, we're having beans this morning.
Beans for breakfast. There's no better breakfast, is there?
I like beans on toast for breakfast.
So do I. I would actually call myself a baked beans connoisseur.
Would you? Well, we can put you to the test. Tell us what the story is.
The story is, you might think beans, you might think Heinz. Heinz means beans.
Beans means Heinz.
Beans means Heinz. Heinz means beans. Who knows? So, of all of the supermarket baked beans, it is actually the Aldi supermarket version, this version over here, which came out on top. The Bramwell's baked beans, 76% on the taste test.
And they're much cheaper as well.
Much cheaper. Households can save, if you're buying 2 cans a week, £100 a year buying the Aldi version of these baked beans. So we thought we're going to do a blind taste test this morning to see.
So we've got the Aldi beans, we've got M&S beans, and we've got beans Heinz. So I think number 2 is the best one.
Yeah, I agree.
Right,
Two came first best for me.
So the Heinz is number 3.
Interesting.
Which was the worst one?
Which is the worst one, which is the ones, actually, I'll buy it home.
Do you know what? That's just proven it. M&S was number 1. And Aldi was number 2, which was our favourite as well.
I said M&S.
Yeah, and we both said Aldi.
We did say Aldi. I have to be honest, I was not expecting that.
I told you. This is the hill I will die on. These are the beans that I get at home and I love them.
At university, you get the tin that's half that size, and it was 21p for the store ones and 23p for Heinz baked beans. And as I say, the key was in the thickness of the sauce and how hard the beans were. They
actually are really nice. I am really surprised, and we buy more than 2 cans a week, so it saved me a couple of £100.
We get through 2 cans.
So you like the Aldi ones?
I like the Aldi ones. I'm shocked.
They're a lot cheaper. Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday when I interview one of the most significant political figures of our era, Boris Johnson. Nothing will be off limits as we discuss his autobiography, Unleashed, and everything in it.
I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit. And I'm very, very happy to be on Camilla Tominey's show, Boris Johnson on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. and again at 6 p.m.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. It's now 1:15. You might have heard the voice of Ada McGee just there because former footballer and TV pundit Gary Lineker, well, his future seems to be up in the air with regards to his gig on Match of the Day on the BBC. Could it be coming to an end?
Yeah, it's a very lucrative gig. He earns more than £1 million every year at the BBC. Well, it's been subject of speculation over his future, with the broadcaster for months following controversy surrounding his social media posts. So, could it all be over for Gary?
Joining us now is sports broadcaster Aidan McGee. Aidan, tell us, is his job on the line here? Is he going to lose it?
I think there's a reasonable chance he would use it. Yeah, he's 63. He can't go on forever. He's been doing it for 25 years, which I believe is longer than anybody else. All his contemporaries.
How long?
25 years he's been doing it for.
Really?
Yeah, I think he's the longest-serving match of the day.
Goodness me.
Now, look,
yeah, time for a change.
It's been successful. I mean, the ratings have been going upwards, which runs contrary to most of the other programmes on the BBC. I mean, terrestrial channels just get better ratings anyway. It's just how things work because of the access, because of the reach they have. But they created a monster with Gary Lineker, and I think what they'll probably do is they'll rotate it next season if they do decide to replace him. As I say, his contract is out, but he has a successful podcast. Yeah. He loves. I know the guy who trained him, and Gary loves live television. Yes, it's live television, match of the day, but it's not the same as having a live match there. So I could see him doing more of that. He's 63, but he's a very young 63. But I think that the way that, unwittingly, he rubbed the noses of the top brass of the BBC in it last year, and it meant that their decision to suspend him couldn't be upheld because all the staff walked out. I don't think they would have liked that. I think that I go back to that phrase again, creating a monster. I don't think Gary Lineker meant to have that effect, but that's what happened.
We were just watching Gary Lineker being interviewed by Mehdi Hassan.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a great political pundit now, isn't he?
He's got that Rest is Politics.
Talking about Israel and all sorts.
He does Rest is Football podcast. But Gary Lineker has... yes, he's 63, but as you say, he was a young 63.
He is, yeah.
60 is the new 50. 50 is the new 40. Yeah, I mean, he could go on for decades.
Look, they may... I don't know about decades, but it depends what you're taking, I suppose. But then, look, the situation is this. I think that what they will do, I don't think they'll give him the chance to maybe stay on, possibly on a reduced contract terms, salary, if you like. He has to travel to Manchester, so it's not an easy gig to fill because there's travel involved. But I think they'll probably rotate. They'll probably give him maybe a third of the shows or a quarter of the shows and then rotate in the rest of throughout the rest of the season.
Final question here, though. Will he be on the same amount of cash?
No, I don't think he will. I think he'll probably take a reduced fee, but then they'll use that that's commensurate to the amount of time he does. It will still probably be very good value, and he has everything else, and he's made a load of money already. Tom, he's got a big house in Barnes. What else do you need?
There must be so many people who would love that gig. So many former footballers.
Yeah, but I mean,
the drift into politics was strategic. There is no question about that. I mean, I did this column at the News of the World, as viewers may have heard earlier on, just a couple of times about 10, 12 years ago, and he never wanted to talk about politics back then, even though our reach was absolutely enormous. And so somebody told him, in common with people like Carol Vorderman, they would have said, listen, drift into this, drift into that.
Yeah, he's certainly branched out, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has.
We've run out of time, though. We'll have to speak again on this.
Maybe Gary Lineker has run out of time.
Evergreen subject. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GBNews. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in the Middle East. Is Iran preparing for war?
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we can still expect to see plenty of fine and dry weather across the country, feeling warm where you catch the sunshine too. That's away from the northwest though, where we have low pressure dominating, swinging in some frontal systems, so some outbreaks of rain here. But high pressure still dominating across much of England and Wales, bringing us those fine and settled conditions. In the northwest though, cloud continuing to spill in here with some outbreaks of rain, this likely turning heavy by the time we reach tomorrow morning. Moving into western parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England and perhaps western parts of Wales too. But away from this, plenty of clear skies, so feeling chilly and likely to see the odd spot of mist and fog by the time we reach tomorrow morning. So quite a different start to the weekend depending on where you are. These outbreaks of rain will continue to move into western parts of Scotland with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle elsewhere. And as I say, notice those brighter colours, so some heavier downpours by the time we reach the morning. Similar across Northern Ireland, a rather grey start with some outbreaks of rain, but elsewhere there should be plenty of bright sunshine and that mist and fog will gradually clear through the course of the morning. As we continue into Saturday, more and more of that cloud will spill into northwestern parts of the country, still with those outbreaks of rain and fairly blustery under those cloudier skies too. But you can see elsewhere still plenty of sunny spells, so a fairly settled start to the weekend for most of us. But notice this heavy rain slowly edging in to the far southwest, so likely to see some heavy outbreaks by the time we reach later into the afternoon. But with highs of around 18 degrees and light winds, it should feel rather pleasant in the sunshine. As we head into the evening, those heavy outbreaks of rain will start to move into the southwest of the country, southern parts of Wales too, and that's generally leading us into a fairly unsettled end to the weekend. But in those sunnier spells, it should still be feeling warm.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We love.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 4th of October. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Decarbonisation or deindustrialisation? Sir Keir Starmer insists he'll not sacrifice British industry to eco-zealots. This as he pledges a whopping £22 billion for green tech. Is carbon capture enough to keep British industry alive?
And are the Falklands next? Renewed fears today over the future of the Falklands and Gibraltar too, after the government's decision to surrender control of the Chagos Islands. We're speaking to a Falklands war veteran with strong views.
Raging Ayatollah. Iran's warmongering supreme leader calls on Muslim nations to prepare against their common enemy, labelling the recent ballistic missile onslaught on Israel the minimum punishment for what he calls its bloodthirsty, vampiric regime.
Yes, I do wonder whether... Can you see a scenario in which the government decide that actually we should cede the Falklands? Can you imagine that scenario? I mean, it does seem that things are moving in that direction.
Do you know, I think it's so hard to imagine a counterfactual where there was never a Falklands War. If there was never a Falklands War, I can completely imagine this government giving up sovereignty over the Falklands. I can completely imagine it. But because it holds such a weight in the sort of cultural imagination of the country now, I just can't see them doing it. But, I mean, I can see them giving up the Pitcairn Islands. We did see them giving up the Chagos Islands. all of these other, St Helena, all of these places that we own around the world that perhaps aren't at the forefront of public consciousness, I think if it's not a household name, they'll probably just think, sure, why not? Let's give it up.
It's not a household name.
Yeah.
No, but maybe there is a lot to that. That actually they've thought, you know, not that many people are going to kick off about this. Most people don't know too much about the Chagos Islands. We'll get away with it. But I'm not sure what's in it for us. What is in it for us? Nothing.
Well, everyone sort of smiles at us at the UN for a week. That's basically it, isn't it? We want to seem nicer on the world stage.
Why?
The thing is that evaporates in about 3 seconds. They think they're swapping hard power for soft power. But what is soft power? I mean, it's completely ethereal.
Well, gbnews.com/your say. Please do get in touch. We're going to be speaking to a Falklands veteran in a little bit. But let's get the headlines with Sam Francis.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon to you. 2 minutes past 2, the top story this hour. Sir Keir Starmer's announced what he calls a game-changing £22 billion funding package for projects that capture and store carbon emissions. Speaking to workers in Liverpool earlier, he said the investment in so-called carbon capture clusters will create thousands of jobs, bring in investment and help meet climate goals. However, Green campaigners are warning the move could prolong oil and gas production, with the projects not set to begin storing carbon until at least 2028. Well, following that speech, our political correspondent Catherine Forster was in Liverpool and she challenged the Prime Minister over the cost of the transition to so-called green energy.
With renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs.
Sir Keir Starmer there speaking to our political correspondent. The UK is sending another £10 million in life-saving aid to Lebanon and urging Britons to leave immediately as the conflict escalates. It follows a night of massive blasts in Beirut, and this was the moment giant explosions were seen near the city's airport. Well, in the past 24 hours, at least 45 people have died across Lebanon as Israel launched its most intense airstrikes on the Lebanese capital so far. Israeli forces are also escalating ground operations in the south of the country, targeting, they say, Hezbollah militants. Meanwhile, we're also hearing reports that Iran plans to target Israeli energy and gas supplies if Israel conducts retaliatory missile attacks. And in Gaza, airstrikes have pushed the death toll to now almost 42,000 people since the conflict began. Here, meanwhile, another flight carrying Britons fleeing that spiralling conflict in Lebanon has landed in Birmingham. It's the second UK chartered plane to arrive. More than 150 UK nationals have already left Beirut, and troops are also on standby in Cyprus for a potential military-led emergency evacuation. It comes as G7 leaders are urging restraint and are also condemning Iran for destabilising the region. Downing Street insists its deal to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius doesn't change their approach to other overseas territories. It comes as Argentina is now pledging to gain full sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. But the government here insists its commitment to the Falklands is unwavering. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us he thinks the Chagos deal is crazy.
Islands being given back to Mauritius. Your reaction?
Crazy. I mean, I urge viewers of GB News to get out your maps, get out your atlases, check out the Chagos Islands, see where they are, see where Mauritius is. A long way away.
Yes.
What is this claim? It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Why are we doing this? Sheer political correctness.
Boris Johnson there, former Prime Minister, speaking to Camilla Tominey. Well, a quick breaking line to bring you that we are hearing from Reading Crown Court this afternoon that a family doctor, retired now, has been described as a prolific and predatory sex offender after being convicted of multiple indecent assaults against patients in Bracknell. Dr Stephen Cox was found guilty of 12 indecent assaults. After a 4-week trial at that court, the 65-year-old targeted 7 women during routine examinations during the 1980s and 1990s. He will, we understand, be sentenced on Monday next week, and authorities are now urging any additional victims of Dr Stephen Cox to come forward. In other news, 2 former Met police officers have been reinstated after being sacked for allegedly lying about smelling cannabis during a stop and search. Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks stopped 2 athletes, Bianca Williams and her partner Ricardo dos Santos, 4 years ago. The Police Appeals Tribunal overturned that dismissal, though, calling the original ruling irrational and inconsistent. Williams and dos Santos have said the decision is disappointing and that they plan to challenge it in court. The Health Secretary is calling on GPs to help make the NHS fit for the future, urging an end to their collective protest action, something he says is only punishing patients. It comes as new figures from August have revealed that 1 in 20 GP appointments were either held online or via video, sparking debate over whether it increases access or compromises patient care. Speaking in Liverpool this morning, Wes Streeting told the Royal College of GPs conference that collaboration is vital to rebuild the NHS.
3 shifts that underpin this government's reform agenda, from hospital to community, analogue to digital, sickness to prevention. Those shifts are not new ideas and they are not radical, but delivering them really would be. I can't do it on my own. I need every part of the NHS to pull together as one team with one purpose, to be the generation that took the NHS from the worst crisis in its history, got it back on its feet and made it fit for the future.
Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you for another roundup in just over half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 2. Now the sun is seemingly setting on the British Empire as the Chagos Islands are set to be handed to Mauritius.
Yes, should we have a little look at what the Prime Minister had to say to our political correspondent Catherine Forster a little bit earlier?
Look, the single most important thing was ensuring that we had a secure base, the joint US in particular, UK base. Hugely important to the US, hugely important to us. We've now secured that. And that is why you saw such warm words from the US yesterday.
What did you make of that?
Well, we spoke to Catherine a little bit earlier, and we will be speaking to her in just a moment. But I think she asked rather a different question, and he might have been somewhat avoiding it. But the big question, of course, is will other territories follow?
Yes, because Argentina are now promising, of course, to reclaim the Falkland Islands with concrete action. That's what they're saying, according to their foreign minister. So are we getting the ball rolling now on all of these claims to various territories? We're joined by Falklands War veteran Simon Weston to discuss this. Simon, it's hardly surprising now, after we've ceded the sovereignty of these Chagos Islands, that Argentina are piping up.
No, you mean once you allow somebody to roll their sleeves up and think that they can get into a fight. But when you look at Argentina, first and foremost, they don't have a military to concern anybody. They certainly don't have an air force or a navy to concern anybody because of underinvestment and the criminality and the filching of funds over there. But all of this nonsense is based on what? Geography? The geography of the Falkland Islands then would allow anybody to claim anything. But as we've seen, that we've ceded ownership of the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia in particular. But for what purpose? The geography of that is so far away from Mauritius, it doesn't make any sense. But then you can start saying, almost any island that is claimed by anybody can be anybody's because they've made some sort of spurious claim. But what people got to remember is, and know, facts are most important here, the Argentinians weren't even a country when we claimed the islands. They were called the nation of states. They didn't have a colour, they didn't have a flag, they didn't have a government, they had nothing. And for them to claim something when we'd already claimed it, the only other people who occupied those islands before we went there were the French, and the French couldn't make it work. So 75% of the population of the Falkland Islands are from the same Scottish hill farming communities that set the islands up. And they were the only people who could make it work. They've never had a claim on the islands. It's always been British. So where this claim comes from, we're over 600 miles from their coastline. That means anywhere can be claimed by anybody. And it's false. It's a false narrative. And anyway, why would we give a successful country that has a successful economy, it has almost no unemployment, it has no real problems, why would we hand that to a country that's rife with corruption and with all sorts of policing and political corruption? You know, why would we hand them over to them? The islanders, over 95% of the islanders, I think it was higher, 98, 99% of the islanders, voted to remain under British sovereignty. Now, surely their opinion counts more than any politician over here. I haven't heard Mr. Starmer say that he was even considering the sovereignty of the Falklands. He's not Mr. Corbyn, for instance, who had all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas that were just foolish beyond. But I've not heard Mr. Starmer say anything about that, and hopefully he never does. But then again, we didn't know there was a huge amount of negotiation going on about Diego Garcia. And if that's to make us safer, well, if we already owned it, how does it make us safer? It's like saying, this is my rifle, but I'll give it to you. You can own it, but I can have it every time I ask for it. You know, it's like, how does that make you safer?
Most people in this country will never set foot on the Falkland Islands. But I think most people feel an emotional connection to a part of the world that is proudly British, that flies our flag, that is under threat from a neighbour. There's almost an emotional connection there to the Falklands and to other British overseas territories as well. Clearly, you risked your life trying to keep that island free. Do you think that politicians in Whitehall, and civil servants for that matter, really understand that emotional connection that so many British people have with our overseas territories?
Oh, I'm fairly certain they understand it, but I think they resent it as well, because as we saw with the removal of the painting at 10 Downing Street of Baroness Thatcher, this was Britain's finest hour, and it was Baroness Thatcher's finest hour. And that is resented, without doubt, by so many people who disliked her immensely. So I'm fairly certain there's a smouldering of that type of resentment going on. So they would love to remove that from her legacy. But at the end of the day, what we have to look at is the islanders want to remain British. They want to remain under British sovereignty. Now, we gave them that option. They chose it. They had a referendum. We have to abide by the referendum. Like every referendum that takes place, we should abide by it. We're told it's a once-in-a-lifetime vote. You know, we've had them with Scotland, with Brexit and everything else. Once you have a once-in-a-lifetime vote, you can't keep going back to these things and renegotiating. We either stick by what we offer people, or what are we doing? We're betraying people's votes.
Well, absolutely. And the key point about the people of the Falkland Islands wanting to stay under British rule is a key one. And also with the Chagos Islands. They don't have a say.
Yeah, they don't like being handed over to Mauritius. That's treated them horribly in the past.
Don't want it. Simon Weston, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Falklands War veteran, of course. Now, we should say a Downing Street spokesperson has told us that, to be very clear on the Falklands, Chagos does not change our policy or approach to other overseas territories.
Well, there we go. They've said it. The politicians have said it. Must be true. The Labour government's £22 billion investment into carbon capture and storage technology is the politics of national renewal. That's according to the Prime Minister.
OK, speaking at a glass-making factory in Cheshire, the Prime Minister stated the move is reigniting our industrial heartlands by investing in the industry of the future, and that the necessary mission of decarbonisation does not mean deindustrialisation.
Let's get more now with our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who, of course, also asked Keir Starmer about his position on the Falklands. So, if you'll indulge us just firstly, what did you make of his answer to you?
Well, his answer, I asked him specifically if he could guarantee that Labour wouldn't sign away the Falklands or any other of our overseas territories. He gave a different answer to the question. He ignored that question, and he basically said it was very important with the Chagos Islands that we continue to have that military base for the next 99 years. And that, I think, is what prompted a very quick clarification to GB News from Number 10 that their position hasn't changed. But we're here at a glass-making factory in just close to Ellesmere Port, south of the River Mersey. It's a factory that makes 3 billion glass bottles a year. 1 in 3 of all the bottles made in the UK are made here. I think the reason this announcement about carbon capture and storage that the government has made today has been made here is because industries like glass making, like cement making, like steel, use a lot of energy now. The government's argument is that whirling it away underground, getting rid of it that way, is going to mean that they can keep these industrial jobs that are so important to many parts of the UK, that they can keep them here. Sir Keir Starmer talked about being a lawyer and working with families losing jobs from the mines in the 90s under John Major, said about how people have been told to sort of get on their bike to find jobs, and said that he didn't want that to happen again. So they've got big plans. They say they're going to spend 22 billion. That's over 25 years, mind you. That's going to bring in 4,000 direct jobs, 50,000 in the long term, and they're going to attract £8 billion in private investment. Now, they're saying that all of this is going to help them remove 8.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide per year from 2028, so not very long away at all. But I think there are real questions over how they make private business put huge amounts of money and energy into this, and about who ultimately is going to be picking up the bill, because of course Labour did say before the general election that they'd bring people's energy bills down by £300 a year. Now, I asked the Prime Minister about that. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
Yes, that is partly caused by international issues, but it was worse in this country because we didn't stabilise the economy, we didn't invest in renewables years ago. Because with renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good, because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs. And that's why this investment is so important. There is always the challenge of the short term versus the long term. But if you never do the long term decisions, you will always have the short term problems.
Interesting, I think, there how he said the challenge of the short term over the long term, because I suspect that we're not going to see our energy bills coming down any time soon. But a lot of words, Ed Miliband saying this is the sound of the future arriving. They think there's lots of jobs coming with this, but of course there's many people very concerned about how the move to net zero is going to also cost lots of jobs. We've seen that in Port Talbot. There's going to be lots of jobs going in the North Sea. It's going to be a very difficult transition and a very expensive transition as well.
Oh, cheery words to leave us on, Catherine. Thank you so much for bringing us that live from the northwest of England.
I mean, carbon capture, it's all well and good, but what about production of energy? Is that not our primary issue when our bills are sky high because we're not making enough of it ourselves?
We're closing down all but one of our nuclear reactors over the coming decade or two.
Where are we getting the energy from? And in the world seems to be getting less stable by the second, and yet we're not investing enough in our own production.
The government clearly needs to produce some more baseload, not intermittent.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair to the government, they've done a lot on. I mean, they've approved more solar panels, solar fields than in the first 3 months than the government did in the last 5 years. I mean, that is energy generation.
It's not going to power a blast furnace, though, is it?
But it's intermittent, so they need to have baseload.
Yeah, we need a bit of baseload, don't we? Are we going to get that from this government?
South Korea builds nuclear power stations for 1/6 the cost we do. 1/6.
Everything's so expensive in this country. It's expensive to do anything. Anyway, we've got lots more coming up in today's show. Iran's supreme leader, this is a rather concerning watch. He's called on Muslim nations to prepare against their common enemy, saying the missile attack on Israel was the minimum punishment they deserved. He also said the US was a rabid dog in the region. OK, we'll reveal more on this rant shortly.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
GB News presenter Mr Patrick Christys is going to live off £15 per week as part of his Friends of the Elderly fundraiser.
Yeah, so far Patrick's raised over £193,000 with the help of all of you at home and all of your generous donations. So thank you so much for all of that. And thank you, Patrick, for coming up with this and flying the flag, I suppose, for these people who feel as if they're being victimised at the moment. Very, very worried about the winter fuel payment. Just tell us how you set upon this £15 figure.
Yeah, absolutely. So the £15 food figure was based around a conversation I had with a pensioner called Sue in Cheshire, who told me, and our viewers, quite a horrendous story, actually, about what she has to live off every week. £15 is her food budget. Her boiler's gone. She can't afford to replace that. She's worried about whether or not she can afford to even put an electric blanket on. She is essentially too proud to actually officially ask for help. We had to really convince her to come on and tell her story so that she thought, she would do it so that she could help others, really. That's why she did it. So I thought, well, it's not absolutely freezing yet. There's things I'm going to do as it gets colder as winter proper kicks on. So I'll do a few bits and bobs there that might be more physically demanding to raise a bit of money. But this is something I can do in the meantime. So I thought, well, I'd live off £15 a week. £13.55 to be precise. Left myself some wiggle room in case I want a can of Diet Coke as me over the course of the week. But this is the food shop that I did yesterday. I've got some lentils, a bit of couscous, a couple of tins of tuna, some tomatoes, some peppers, a bit of pasta, some eggs, and a stir-fry thing that I think I'm actually going to have to eat today, because if viewers have got the impression that I'm a man who doesn't necessarily plan things through properly, they are correct, because I got this and it goes out of date tomorrow. So there you go.
The People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday when I interview one of the most significant political figures of our era, Boris Johnson. Nothing will be off limits as we discuss his autobiography, Unleashed, and everything in it.
I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit. And I'm very, very happy to be on Camilla Tominey's show, Boris Johnson on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. and again at 6 p.m.
Good afternoon, Britain, at 26 minutes past 2. Now to the Middle East. Iran will not back down on their fight against Israel. That's according to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who has called for Muslim unity and branded the Iranian ballistic missile strike earlier this week as a minimum punishment for Israel.
Yes, there he is with a rifle to his side. This, of course, as tensions in the region continue to intensify, with massive blasts reported in Lebanon's capital, Beirut, overnight.
Well, let's get some more now with military analyst Sean Bell, because, Sean, how concerned should we be about what many people are describing was a warmongering speech this morning?
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom and Emily. Inevitably, it's of concern, but I think we have to be quite careful. There's a lot of this rhetoric that's for a domestic audience, and it's better understanding what's actually going on the ground at the moment. You know, you look at Israel, they were dealing with Hamas for a year, or nearly a year. The 7th of October is their 1-year anniversary, and what Israel's now done is pivot up to the north to deal with Hezbollah that's been, you know, attacking them solidly for the last year. And that attack seems to be a two-phase operation. One of the phases you commented on, that there are big explosions in Beirut. That seems to be precision strikes against Hezbollah leadership, command and control, bunkers and the like. And the second part of the operation, though, is in the buffer zone between Israel and the Lebanon. I don't want to do a history lesson, but the 2006 war, the last time they had a major conflict, you know, the blue line was the point of withdrawal for the Israeli forces. And of course, the Hezbollah were meant to move north of the Litani River, leaving a buffer. And the only people meant to be in there were the United Nations and the Lebanon armed forces. But as soon as the ink was dry on that in 2006, Hezbollah's moved in, and therefore Israel has been threatened, their northern, the population that live in the north of Israel. So it's pretty clear that Israel's trying to clear that area, but it's a very dangerous operation. Hezbollah has mined all sorts of buildings, and that's where the Israelis are suffering the most casualties. But do we expect this to become a full invasion? No. The lessons from 2006 would haunt Israel. Almost certainly they don't have the appetite to do that.
I take your point that there's a lot of rhetoric coming out of Iran. Of course there is. But was this speech just for a domestic audience? I mean, it was beamed out across Western media. We didn't show it, but other broadcasters in this country chose to. It's clearly trying to get people on board with their message across the Muslim world. He's calling on Muslim nations to essentially resist and resist against their common enemy. Of course, that common enemy is Israel, but also the United States and the West as a whole. I mean, watching that speech, watching the attempt to rally the troops potentially across Western nations as well, it's very worrying.
I absolutely agree with you, Emily. It's very, very worrying. But what you have to do, again, is look at this through the lens of history. Iran has been saber-rattling for some time, but it may have misjudged the 180 ballistic missiles that were sent in, gave Israel some excuse in a way. It sounds flippant, but to actually open a third front. What you've got to remember is Iran is developing a nuclear weapon, and if it was to have a nuclear weapon and it's an existential threat to Israel, that would be possibly a really major threat to Israel. As a result, Israel will want to actually take out that nuclear weapons capability. And having had 180 missiles fly at them, Iran will be deeply concerned now that Israel, which is a very powerful nation, will be able to now seek a major retaliation. Up till now, each side has largely been, they use this term measured. It's a horrible term, because how can you say measured to those people who die as a result of it? But even the Iranian attack the other night, the Ayatollah said, that's it, we've made our point, we've struck at Israel, we've punished them, we've got no further plans. So this rhetoric is all part of the game that they play to try to stop and dissuade Israel from upping the ante.
And yet, Iran has internal problems. There have been protests on the streets of Iran in recent years. The Prime Minister was recently killed in a helicopter crash. They've got a new Prime Minister in. Of course, the real power in the Ayatollah remains the same. But very often in these sorts of regimes, when you get a sense of instability, that is when they can be most unpredictable and most dangerous. Up until now, they've been funding their proxies to fight Israel. But now we've seen, of course, those two strikes, the ballistic missile, the ICBM strike, but of course the drones and the cruise missiles as well, just a few weeks ago. It's entirely possible that there will be some sort of state-on-state conflict.
Well, yes. I mean, again, we've always got these grey hairs because I was first joined the military in the middle of the Cold War. We were worried about nuclear war, and we were worried about it almost every day. The last 30 years, we've largely lived in a sort of peace dividend, less worried about it. So when these sorts of things flare up, understandably, people get very worried about it. But in the big scheme of things, Iran is not in a very strong position at the moment. That's why it's trying to develop its nuclear arsenal. As you suggested, the leadership there is in a somewhat fractious state. If it can't demonstrate that it can protect its country, then its countrymen may well decide to up and oust it. And therefore, if you look at it purely from a military perspective, I wouldn't be a betting man to suggest that they would prevail if they were to end up in a full-scale war. As a result, that's something that Iran will be really keen to avoid doing because it calls their bluff.
Thank you very much indeed. Sean Bell, military analyst, thank you very much for taking the time out of your afternoon. I do worry about, this speech being beamed across not only the Muslim world but also in the West, that it will rally the troops over here who would listen to that.
If there
want
are
to take matters into
people
their own
sympathetic
hands.
to the Iranian regime
Exactly.
that they could
and we know there
get
are.
out on the streets.
We know there are. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Now, GB News can reveal that more than 300 small boat migrants have crossed illegally to the UK so far just today. That's to come after your headlines with Sam.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just after 2:30. The top story from the newsroom this afternoon. Sir Keir Starmer has announced what he calls a game-changing £22 billion funding package for projects that capture and store carbon emissions. Speaking to workers in Liverpool, he said the investment in so-called carbon capture clusters will create thousands of jobs, bring in investment and help meet the UK's climate goals. But Green campaigners are warning the move could prolong oil and gas production, with those projects not set to begin storing carbon until at least 2028. Well, following that speech in Liverpool, our political correspondent Catherine Forster was there and challenged the Prime Minister over the cost of the transition to so-called clean and green energy.
With renewable energy, you get lower energy costs for good, not just for one winter, not, capping for a few months in necessary circumstances, but lower energy bills for good because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. That is really important. You get independence and security. By doing renewables here in Britain, you're not relying on the international market. And therefore, even if there are international conflicts that affect the price of energy, we would have our own supply, which is independent. And of course, what you get is the next generation of jobs.
Well, next to the latest developments in the Middle East, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy has confirmed on social media that the government has chartered a third flight for British evacuees. That flight has now, we understand, left Lebanon. It follows a night of massive blasts in Beirut, and this was the moment a giant explosion was seen near that airport. Well, in the past 24 hours, at least 45 people have now died across Lebanon as Israel launched its most intense airstrikes on the Lebanese capital. Israeli forces are also escalating ground operations in the south, targeting Hezbollah militants. They have just said in the last few minutes that 250 Hezbollah militants have so far been killed in that ground operation. Meanwhile, we're also hearing reports that Iran plans to target Israeli energy and gas supplies. That's if Israel conducts retaliatory missile attacks. And in Gaza, airstrikes there have pushed the death toll to now almost 42,000 since the conflict began. And Downing Street insists its deal to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius doesn't change its approach to other overseas territories. It comes as Argentina is now pledging to gain full sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. However, the government here insists its commitment to the Falklands is unwavering. And former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us he thinks the Chagos deal is crazy.
Islands being given back to Mauritius. Your reaction?
Crazy. I mean, I urge viewers of GB News to get out your maps, get out your atlases, check out the Chagos Islands, see where they are, see where Mauritius is. A long way away.
Yes.
What is this claim? It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Why are we doing this? Sheer political correctness.
Well, that's it from me for now. Tatiana Sanchez will have your next update at 3 o'clock. Tom and Emily up next. First, though, a quick break.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, there's going to be plenty of fine and dry weather across the country and feeling warm where you do catch the sunshine. Away from the northwest, though, where we do have some wet and windy weather, and this is where low pressure is taking hold, moving into the northwest of the country, but still high pressure remaining dominant across much of England and Wales, bringing us that fine weather to end the working week. So plenty of sunny spells across England, Wales, northern parts of England and just through the Scottish borders, but across Ireland, western parts of Scotland, cloudier here with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle and turning quite blustery under those cloudier skies too. So feeling cooler here, but where you do catch the sunshine across the south and southeast, that's where we'll see highs of 16, 17, and that's where it's going to be feeling warm in those lighter winds too. So as we head into the evening, those outbreaks of rain will continue to push their way into parts of western Scotland. So quite a damp end to the day. And similar across the rest of Northern Ireland, fairly cloudy with those outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Across parts of Wales, southern parts of England and across eastern parts too, it is generally going to be remaining dry, but feeling quite cold as soon as that sun goes down. So likely we could see a spot of frost once again, perhaps even some mist and fog patches under the clearest skies, mainly in the far southeast. But across northern areas, once again, Scotland, Northern Ireland, just through across the Scottish borders, another cloudy night with those outbreaks of rain, and they may just start to turn quite heavy in western parts by the time we reach Saturday morning. And once again, fairly blustery under those cloudier skies too. So for the first part of the weekend, a little bit of a split, that wet weather continuing in northern areas, but still plenty of fine and dry weather on offer to start the weekend. We will start to see a bit of a change, though, from the southwest later on. Notice these brighter spells, so some heavy rain on its way across the southwest later into Saturday. But once again, where you catch the sunshine, it will feel warm.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. 3 issues on the northbound A1M is closed. Junction 61 to 62, Boburn to Carville and queuing for a collision. There's emergency repairs northbound 36 to 37, Doncaster up to Mar. It's slow with a lane shut and slow to northbound just around Junction 6 for Welling, following an earlier overturned vehicle. Now a lane closed on the entry slip on the southbound M6 coming on at Knutsford 19, a collision causing queues. Southbound A404 in High Wycombe shut from the M40 at 4 to the Marlow Junction. There's investigation work and it's queuing. Westbound M4 shut 14 to 15, Hungerford to Swindon, Eastern queuing for emergency repairs, and 2 lanes coned off on the clockwise M25 after Chorleywood 18, a collision causing queues back to the Chalfont Viaduct. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 20 to 3. And GB News can reveal that more than 300 small boat migrants have illegally crossed to the UK so far today.
Yes, so the crossings are the first since Sunday because of the bad weather in the Channel, but 300 in just one day.
It comes as the Home Secretary discusses how best to tackle people smugglers with her fellow G7 interior ministers in Italy today.
OK, well, our Home and Security editor Mark White joins us now. Mark, I guess the weather has been pretty appalling, but today it's calm.
Yeah, it doesn't really take too much in the way of calculation there to decide, what it is that's driving the number of migrants or reducing the number of migrants coming across the Channel. We're told that actually there is another small boat en route. So 6 already have crossed illegally into UK waters today. About 330 migrants on board who made that crossing. With that 7th boat, if it makes it, that will take us near 400, which is pushing more than 2,600, close to 25,700 for the year so far. So we're really only a few thousand off beating the target for the whole of last year. And you're absolutely right, Emily, about the situation in terms of the weather. The weather in the Channel has been appalling really for the last week, and that's why we've seen quite a dip. But every time that weather improves, more are coming across the Channel. And Yvette Cooper is in Italy at the moment. She's meeting her G7 colleagues there, fellow interior ministers, and says that they're speeding up international cooperation to deal with the migrant crisis, not just in this country, of course, but throughout Europe, greater powers to allow joint investigations to take place between different nations. Our eyes, understandably, have been focused on what's happening in the Middle East with that growing crisis, but we continue to, here on this channel, focus on the crisis on our borders over the other side of the English Channel, because the two issues really are linked in the sense that we see every time there is an international migrant, an international issue, a war or conflict in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, the numbers heading to the northern coast of France trying to get to the UK surge as well.
Mark, it is stunning to hear that number. 25,700 it looks like we'll reach today for this year. It looks like we are ahead of where we were last year this year. The trend line is going in the wrong direction. And yet this government continues to say, smash the gangs, international cooperation, legal systems, take people to court. Is that enough?
Well, listen, it's going to require a very significant effort to try to do that. It is going to require international cooperation. It's going to require the cooperation of specifically our partner on the other side of the English Channel in France to try to deal with that. And it's going to rely to a large degree on things stabilising in other countries, which we know, of course, the way in which geopolitics is operating and the security situation in many countries around the globe, it seems to be worsening rather than easing in any way, shape or form, which means that more people are on the move trying to get to what they see are safer, more prosperous environs in the West, and that takes many of them up to the UK. So many of these issues are outside the control of the UK government or indeed any other governments in the UK. They are trying to deal with it, but we got the news just the other day about the fact that although Labour had promised to stop using asylum seeker hotels, they're now realising it's a more insurmountable problem than they first thought, and suggesting that it might be up to 3 years before they end this practice of putting many thousands of people in hotels right across the country.
Well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that exclusive. 300 people crossed already today, potentially more with these next boats. Thank you, Mark White, our Home Security Editor, there beaming in from Westminster for us.
And of course, we'll be keeping an eye on the channel throughout the day here on GB News. But lots more coming up on today's programme. Children are said to be arriving at school still in nappies, unable to properly communicate with classmates as well. We'll speak to a child behavioural expert after this.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This week, Free Speech Brighton, a sister group of the Free Speech Union, claimed that they were kicked out of a pub in the city for discussing trans issues in schools. The group booked a room in a pub for an evening of speeches and discussion when they claimed security guards came and asked them to leave after one speaker began to talk about this topic. Now, a clip of the evening was in fact posted to social media. Can you give us some background to what happened, what the event was for, and why you booked it?
Our normal pub was being refurbished, so about 3 weeks ago I went in and booked a local pub for a meeting, and they didn't ask any questions about what sort of meeting. It was in a back room. It was mainly secluded from the rest of the pub, so I thought it would be fine. But anyway, they didn't ask any questions. They took my booking. We arrived, I set up. The first speaker started speaking, who's a retired teacher who is concerned about trans in schools and how that affects children. But she was talking purely about children. She was not talking about adults who have protected characteristics, obviously. And then towards the end of her speech, I became aware of security guards standing behind me in the middle room. So I went to have a quick word with them and see what they wanted. And they said, we've had a complaint. And I said, what's the complaint? And they wouldn't say. Then they said, will you come and talk to the landlord? So I went to the front of the bar and they indicated this chap was the landlord, but he looked about 20, so I don't think he was the landlord. So I said, I hear you have a complaint about us. Can you tell me what it is? And he couldn't.
That sounds very Kafka-esque, as though you've committed a crime, but they can't tell you what the crime is.
Well, that's what I couldn't understand, because, you know, you might... Obviously, they can't tell you who the complainant is, but they should be able to tell you what the complaint is.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, this Sunday when I interview one of the most significant political figures of our era, Boris Johnson. Nothing will be off limits as we discuss his autobiography, Unleashed, and everything in it.
I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit. And I'm very, very happy to be on Camilla Tominey's show, Boris Johnson on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show on Sunday at 9:30 a.m. and again at 6 p.m.
Now, this is rather concerning. It's 2:49, by the way. Children, they're arriving at school still in nappies, apparently, unable to properly communicate with their classmates. This is according to the former Children's Commissioner for England, Anne Longfield, so she should know what she's talking about. She's warned that children are being held back and not receiving the necessary support needed to be school-ready. I guess the question is, who's to blame for this? Is it the parents? Is it the parents? Is it a knock-on effect from COVID? What is it?
Really concerning infantilisation of young children. But we're joined now by child behavioural expert Amanda Jenner. Amanda, what could be causing this?
Well, yeah, it's very concerning, as a lot of people will be feeling that today. This is not news to me because obviously I hear about it a lot. We have got the pandemic and, you know, we can't ignore that. You know, these children were not attending nursery school. They weren't mixing with their peers. Parents were working from home. So obviously not necessarily having time to obviously hit these milestones with them. But, you know, children attending school in nappies, there's two sides to this. One, some of them aren't potty trained or toilet trained, but also children are going into schools when they're nervous. It's a new environment. So that is part of it as well. So that's, you know, it's really important we actually do listen to that. And, you know, and they're saying children going in school in buggies, which doesn't concern me as much as children going into school not using the toilet. So I think, you know, more needs to be done. You know, they need help. Parents need help. We can say lazy parenting, point the finger. But honestly, I work hands-on with lots of parents and it really affects the whole family. It is a big problem.
Is it not negligence, though, if you haven't potty trained your child, that they're having to wear a nappy? Of course, it was special needs children, obviously, out of the equation here. But for the ordinary child, It must be a bit of parental negligence. I mean, you know, a lot of people work a number of jobs, a lot of people are very busy indeed, a lot of people single-parent families, a huge amount to do. But surely that has to be a priority, teaching your child to use the toilet.
Of course, it is definitely a priority. And obviously, it's a life skill that we all have to learn and be taught. But it's not an easy one. I mean, it is a really tricky one. And what happens is, I think, okay, there's a small percentage that maybe it is, you know, the parents, because I've been doing this for 20 years. But the majority of the cases when people contact me, myself, or I go to visit schools or speak to families, is they've potty trained them, or the child just hasn't got it and they have no other choice to start school in September. So they send them in pull-ups underneath their uniform, which is awful for the child, because it doesn't just affect, you know, obviously it affects their behaviour, it affects them, you know, their appetite, it affects their demeanour, they become withdrawn, and, you know, and also then they get bullied. So, you know, I'm talking to the government myself at the moment. Fingers crossed that we can try and get more support for these children. It's the children that I'm worried about. It's the children, you know.
Of course, and I think it tugs on everyone's heartstrings when sort of you hear stories of children who just aren't developing, aren't growing up in the normal way. Amanda, I suppose the question then turns to what can be done here?
Well, when, you know, I had my children 28 years ago, you know, I could call on the health visitor whenever I wanted. I had my little red book and I used to call the health visitor. And it was even about a silly little thing because, you know, when you're a first-time parent, you don't know what's right or wrong. And, you know, you just want to do the best you can. And most parents want to do that. And I think nowadays, because they're so stretched, you've got one health visitor to lots of different areas where we haven't got that, you know, that expertise on the end of the phone anymore, and that reassurance that we're doing all right, but you can do it this way. So I think the government, you know, I read a report today, you know, the early years are going to look into supporting that a bit more and give them more help. Let's hope they do, because this headline comes up so much.
Yeah, it does.
And nothing's getting done about it. You know, I'm trying to get the word out there, but...
Well, Amanda, thank you very much indeed. Amanda Jenner, child behaviour expert, thank you very much for talking to us about this story. I must say quite a few people who are getting in touch aren't particularly sympathetic. Nicholas, you know, it's just lazy parents who have kids, realise the hard work, get bored with them, pass the problems to somebody else. Could there also be an issue that people aren't living close by family anymore, not close to the grandparents? Because if I had a problem, I'd call my mum, right?
Yeah.
And ask, what do I do?
I think it is that. It's those networks. We were talking about this on the show yesterday as well, actually. Not as many children are being born. So it might be that if you have a child, you can't talk to your best friend because they don't have a child. And because so many fewer people are now having children, you can't lean on those networks of perhaps people going through the same experience in the same way as was the case even 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, Peter says it's nothing less than rubbish parenting. No excuses. Oh, well, there you go. Anyway, we've come to the end of the show. You've been watching Good Afternoon Britain. Don't go anywhere, because it is the lovely Dawn Neeson who's up next, standing in for Martin Daubney, so stay tuned for that.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we can still expect to see plenty of fine and dry weather across the country, feeling warm where you catch the sunshine too. That's away from the northwest though, where we have low pressure dominating, swinging in some frontal systems, so some outbreaks of rain here. But high pressure still dominating across much of England and Wales, bringing us those fine and settled conditions. In the northwest though, cloud continuing to spill in here with some outbreaks of rain, this likely turning heavy by the time we reach tomorrow morning. Moving into western parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England and perhaps western parts of Wales too. But away from this, plenty of clear skies, so feeling chilly and likely to see the odd spot of mist and fog by the time we reach tomorrow morning. So quite a different start to the weekend depending on where you are. These outbreaks of rain will continue to move into western parts of Scotland with some outbreaks of rain and drizzle elsewhere. And as I say, notice those brighter colours, so some heavier downpours by the time we reach the morning. Similar across Northern Ireland, a rather grey start with some outbreaks of rain, but elsewhere there should be plenty of bright sunshine and that mist and fog will gradually clear through the course of the morning. As we continue into Saturday, more and more of that cloud will spill into northwestern parts of the country, still with those outbreaks